Good morning, Murder Church. What is up? Welcome in here, congregation. Episode 22, Phil Spector, Hollywood murder trial, coming at you today. Thanks for coming in here. Really appreciate it. Please hit that like, share this out on Twitter, on X, let people know. I see that Sheila Duffy's already done that. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Let the folks know that you're hanging and banging this morning. We're going to be hanging out for probably the next 3.5, 4 hours per usual on a Sunday morning. We have a will in play. And, yeah, we're going to keep this thing moving and rocking and rolling. Thanks so much for hanging and banging this morning, Buzz Nation. Coming at you. Let's go.
Let's rock.
Ladies and gentlemen, what's up, everybody? Get in here, get your seats, coming in, ready to have a nice church session this morning. I tell you what, I'll tell you what right now, Murder Church, live on the air, week 22, Phil Spector, Hollywood murder trial. There's the Boctrix coming through. Welcome in here, welcome in here. My eyes are a little bit watery. I had to put the drops in there this morning. This is after a few days of doing the drops. Like, it's looking a little better, maybe? I don't know. I think like that one side's looking a little better. Really thought it was an infection. This side's looking really good, which it wasn't bad to begin with. And if it is a busted blood vessel on this side, they said that could take a while to look normal again. So I don't actually know. Hopefully those are helping. Hopefully that's where we're at. Hopefully that's what's happening. Let me get this chat in here real quick, and then let me see who's hanging out this morning. Who's hanging out? One thing I want to do a shout out real quick that came through after Feral Friday, because she's absolutely amazing and comes through and always gifting out and giving loot after the shows. Sometimes she's not in here live. Lakota. Right here, put it in here. Lakota came through after Feral Friday with a $15 Cash App drop. Thank you so much. Appreciate the shit out of that. You know what I'm talking about, baby. We're not messing around. I'm going to go ahead and hit the church bells just so I don't forget this morning. Let's go ahead and start this thing off right. There we go. Get them things rolling. Let's see where we're at right now on the wheel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 2 more to a will spin this morning. Let's see if we can get there. Yeah, Cash App, Linktree can get you there. Venmo, PayPal, all that is open. Buy us a coffee. Or if you gift out memberships, make sure you have memberships turned on, because we have incredible people here that will gift those out. Or giving supers. All of that will get you on the wheel. Taryn Dusky in the house, Kathy in the house, Dizzy in the house, Simi Sharp in the house, who's got a shirt coming soon, Pussycat in the house, good morning, welcome in here, new here, that's what I'm talking about, Bassett Page, holy shit, okay, you're going to be getting a lot of shout outs, because that Meowder Church name, okay, we have taken that, we've made a shirt, me and Phil from Tayo Toys, merch is coming soon with the Meowder Church name on it, and I hope that you've seen the logo that's out there also. Holy shit. Charlene, good morning. Again, Sheila Duffy, thank you so much for that Twitter share, that goes far. Kai's in the house, Jersey Jen, Sleuths Investigates, Kelly Bobelli said let's go. She's going to gift out a membership out the gate. Thank you so much. Who got that?
Welcome to the party.
Charlene, welcome in here. Thank you so much.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
We're not playing around, baby. Good morning. Where's the pickles? Yes. Navy grogs, beers, coffees. Probably nothing's in the chat. We got some new members in this son of a bitch, baby. And we got a wheel out the gate. Jersey Jen just finished that thing off by gifting out one to Jesse Charles.
Welcome to the party, pal.
Get in here, guys. Thank y'all so much. Really freaking appreciate it. We don't mess around. I'm not sure if y'all know that. So let me get Kelly on here, and we're actually going to start this out with a will spin before we get to, right now we're on part 2 of Dr. Louis Pena's testimony. That is going to be spending about 47 minutes with this, continuing to spend time with Pena, who we were on Tuesday. So let me get Kelly on here before I mess this up here and get a little bit too far ahead of myself. I do need to go upstairs and also make a little bit of coffee. But we're going to do this wheel spin first. We're going to start Sunday morning out with a freaking wheel spin and get somebody a shirt won. Let's see. Oh, Cash App just come through here. That is going to be starting off a new wheel as well. Who was that? Holy crap. We have one wheel full now. This new wheel getting started off. Oh, shit. By none other than Catherine. Thank you so much, Kathy, coming through here. Always a huge supporter. Oh, shit. Now, here we go. 420 for add pumpkin, my cat, to the wheel of Me Outer Church. See, that's perfect. That's absolutely, that blends in so well. So yes, right here, new wheel has already started this morning. Let me go ahead and get you on here real quick. Kathy, who's absolutely amazing, coming through with a 420. And if you know, you know, with the Cash App, baby. Thank you so much. Oh, shit. Sheila Duffy coming through with the $1 with the 99 cents. Thank you so much. She's going to be the second name on this wheel. Hell yeah. The only thing I need to do is fill out the wheel. So I will go ahead and start this video. We'll do a quick wheel spin. As soon as I get it filled out, I'll go make some coffee, and we're going to continue to what? Hang and bang, baby, this morning. You know, we don't mess around. Y'all know that, right?
Hanging and banging.
I think y'all know that by now. All right, I got this updated here. Yeah, let me get this thing filled out. Laura's coming through here from Australia. Hell yeah. This is fucking dope. Everybody's in the house. That's what I like to see. Murder Church is a growing commodity, baby. So let me start this thing up here. We got Fro Phil to start us off this morning. And yeah. Anybody that wasn't there for Feral Friday, holy shit, we had a real get down time party on Friday now. Woo! Kick was wild. Kick was wild. Make sure the sound is correct here. And then, yes, I'm going to go ahead and fill this thing out. We're going to get a wheel spin. I'm going to get some coffee. So we'll start doing this. It'll take me just 2 seconds to do that. 1 second, guys.
Order, course in session. All right, the record will reflect all parties are present. As here
Die hard.
the jurors, the alternates, and the witness are present. You may proceed.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Let's go.
Before we left off, Dr. Pena, you were explaining to the jurors the bruise on the, I've been doing this for years. I never can remember posterior, anterior.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's anterior.
Anterior. All right, I'll forget that.
Or
10
front.
minutes from now. Yeah, how about that? Front. That's a little easier. All right, the bruise toward the front of Miss Clarkson's wrist as compared to the bruise toward the back of Miss Clarkson's wrist at the same basic area, just the opposite side of the wrist, correct?
Yes.
All right, and those bruises are, as my thumb and forefinger are indicating, on opposite sides of Miss Clarkson's wrist, correct?
Yes.
There's another bruise just up her forearm where my finger is basically indicating, correct?
That's
the
correct.
inside of her forearm?
Yes.
All right. The bruising that you've described on her right hand, I should say right forearm and hand area, her left hand area as well. Did you remove those bruises for any microscopic inspection, microscopic analysis?
I removed the bruise from the wrist area here toward the pinky finger side, and the two bruises on the forearm or the front part of the lower arm. I looked at those under a microscope.
And what's the reason for looking at those bruises under a microscope? What does that tell you?
Well, basically, I want to see if there's any kind of what's called inflammatory reaction, or I expect to see blood, but I'm looking for other cells that might be coming in to help repair or kind of get rid of those red cells. It's a very tough study in our field as a medical examiner. There's a lot of time differences, and I won't get into times because I was basically trying to see if it might give me maybe a better time frame of when the injuries might have occurred based on the inflammation response. I didn't see any. What does it mean? Basically, in my opinion, it's a recent, or sometimes we'll say acute injury as opposed to an old, and that's all I can tell you.
Do the injuries that you saw, the bruising injuries that you saw on Miss Clarkson's hands and forearms appear to be
Get this out of the
approximately
way.
the same
Got this
age?
thing filled up.
Yes.
In other words, they occurred
I'm
at
excited
around
about
the
it,
same.
baby. Got a wheel ready to rock and roll. Let me get this thing in place, and we're going to do it. Let me just look through the chat, make sure I'm not missing anything in here. Chini coming through here. We still got people coming through the door this morning. I love to see it. I just also want to make sure and just give some shout outs to any folks that are still possibly sharing. And there's a lot of them. Hell yes. Sharing on the old X machine. Dizzy, thank you so much. Appreciate that. Taryn Dusty coming through. Always with the shares. Love it. Love it. Kelly Bobelli with the share. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate that. And where's the pickles? A nice retweet as well. Bassett Page, a nice retweet. Thank you guys. Those go really far, man. The community continues to grow. And yeah, I'll be right back here. We're not going to be going anywhere. Actually, we're going to be doing this right here. Good luck, everyone. Okay, so I don't know what to do. I mean, is it wild side? On the screen, it looks like wild side, but in real life, in reality, I swear to God, it looks dead in the middle. Like it looks like it's dead in the middle of wild side and Magic Backpack, who came through on Feral Friday on Friday night. Like on the actual, I tried to get it a little closer so you guys could see better, but I'm gonna make a call here. So Magic Backpack was Dan's friend that came through on Feral Friday, and he was really trying to get Dan to help him out, you know, with some internet stuff. So I'm gonna shoot this to Wildside, and I mean, like, I know even right there, it actually looks like Wildside. The little flipper is still not fully flipped, but the actual indicator is down the fucking black line. Like, even right there in that shot, it looks like it's Wildside, but it's just the way the camera's kind of positioned. But we're going Wildside on that. Wildside, congratulations. Get yourself a shirt. Get at me. Let me know. It does look like Wildside, but I'll take a picture as well. Well, I'll do that in a minute. It's Wildside. It's fucking Wildside. Magic Backpack wants to get at me. He can get at me. Welcome in here, everyone. Thank you so much. The wheel's still in play, still going to be going, and no, I'm shooting at the Wildside. I'm giving that one to Wildside. And Wildside's an absolute insane supporter, always coming through here. I don't even think she's in here this morning. She came through on. We have another Willgate. She came through on Feral Friday and gifted out. So no, I'm going Wildside. And I know, and everyone even saying it's looking like that. It's the same way as that one night that we had it done, and it looked like it was one side further than the other, but it's really kind of just the way the camera is hitting it, because it's sort of weirdly, I don't know. There's like I'm going with Wildside. I'm just gonna call it. That's where we're going. Put a little too much thought into it. I'm gonna put it on here so I don't forget also. So I'm gonna go upstairs, make some coffee. And yeah, we got to get Wildside in the winner's circle here. Wildside's already won a Feral Friday shirt also, which is awesome. She can add a little more to her collection here. Boom. Hell yeah. Nice. And yeah, Tasha, I still got to get her shirt for birthday girl. Simi Sharps let me know who she wanted to hang a banging shirt. So yeah, we're still moving here, folks. Get this back up here. All right, I'm going to go make a little bit of coffee, and I'll be right back. Thanks, everyone, for hanging out.
Time, in your opinion.
That's correct.
And you indicated that they were all recent, and that's about the best you can do as far as laying down a time frame. They were relatively recent, and when you say recent, you're talking about recent in terms of her time of death.
That's correct.
Before her time of death.
Yes.
This bruising did not occur after her death, correct?
No.
All right. And that's the same that you indicated with regard to the bruise on the left side of Miss Clarkson's tongue. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, one of the things that you did say in terms of Miss Clarkson's immediacy, the immediacy of her death or incapacitation, I think you did say that her heart could continue to beat for a short time.
I'll be right back, guys. You guys are the best.
What does short time mean?
Well, there's no studies on this for obvious reasons, but the person would go unconscious, like I said, immediately. There might be a few residual.
I need to get one of those for
impulses to
some
the
coffee
heart.
myself.
Could it be 3 seconds, 5 seconds?
All right, watch it on my phone.
The heart's still beating. Could it go further than that? I'd be very surprised, to be honest with you, because it's a very quick, and devastating injury, and the heart should not beat longer than those seconds that I just gave you.
All right. The heart may residually continue to beat for 3 to 5 seconds based on internal electrical impulses, correct?
Yes.
All right. Are we talking about strong heartbeats? Or are we talking about faint or thin heartbeats?
It would be dissipating. So if you look at a graph with pressure, I'll just demonstrate with on a graph. Let's say you're looking at a graph, the pressure would start to drop, would go like this, but it would be pretty quick. And here would be the time frame down as one of your axes. So it'd be a pretty quick time.
All right, so within 3 to 5 seconds or thereabouts, Miss Clarkson's heart would completely stop.
Thereabouts, that's correct.
And does that assist you in coming to a conclusion about when the approximate time these bruises, the tongue bruise, the arm bruises, the hand bruises, occurred?
Yes.
All right. And these are all ante-mortem, in other words, before death?
Yes.
And you indicated that the bruises on the wrists and the hand areas of Ms. Clarkson are all at least relatively recent with regard to her time of death, and they all are about the same age, correct?
Yes.
Occurring at or about the same time, correct?
Yes.
In your opinion, is that suggestive of someone, the location of the bruises, the acuteness of the bruises, the age of the bruises, is that consistent with someone, for instance, grabbing Ms. Clarkson's wrists?
Yes.
All right. Is it suggestive, in your opinion, of resistance bruising?
Yes.
All right. You were at the crime scene, you've already indicated, correct?
Yes.
Did you look at Ms. Clarkson's hands while you were at the crime scene?
Yes, I did.
With regard to, I want to direct your attention to the amount of blood and or tissue that was or was not present on Ms. Clarkson's hands. Your Honor, I have 4 35mm photographs. In this particular case, I'm going to ask with the court's permission to mark the actual photographs. The Elmo simply washes them out too badly. I'll ask that the doctor be allowed to look at the actual photographs.
Certainly.
People's, I believe we're at 48.
Yes.
People's 49, People's 50, and People's 51.
You may.
Taking a look at what's been marked as, these have smeared a little bit, People's 48 through 51. Take a look at those photographs and tell me, and they're indicated on the overhead just very poorly. Tell me if you recognize those photographs.
Yes.
Were all those photographs taken at the crime scene?
Yes, they were.
These are photographs that were taken before Ms. Clarkson was washed by the coroner's office?
Yes.
With regard to, and you also saw her once she was back at the coroner's office, correct?
Yes.
And you saw her before she was washed?
Yes.
Back at the coroner's office?
That's correct.
All right. Did you take a close look at Ms. Clarkson's hands, both her left hand and right hand?
Yes, I did.
Did you notice any abundant blood staining on either of Ms. Clarkson's hands?
I saw none.
All right. I realize that these are somewhat poor quality pictures, but based on the 35mm photographs that you see, does that's in front of you, 48 through 51, do those appear to be consistent with the condition that you saw Ms. Clarkson's hands when she was at the location before she'd been touched or moved?
Yes.
May I approach? Your Honor, because of the poor quality of these photographs, if counsel has no objection, I would ask that these be published to the jurors.
Any objection? No. All right, you may pass them out.
Thank you. Your Honor, the court, rather I wait until everybody has a chance to...
I think they can quickly glance at them when you
Okay.
continue if you wish.
That's fine. Dr. Pena, those are fine. Take those off. Is sampling done in the normal course of an autopsy? In other words, tissue sampling, et cetera.
Yes.
Did you take any tissue samples from the tongue and or throat area of Ms. Clarkson?
In the tongue area, Mr. Steve Dowell, D-O-W-E-L-L, did a gunshot residue kit, it's called, or like a sticky, I don't know, like tape, adhesive tape, to look for powder, basically, on the top of the tongue.
All right. And so there was some tissue samples taken from the top of the tongue and the back of the throat area?
That's correct.
From the oral mucosa area, correct?
Yes.
You also already indicated that you took tissue samples from the bruising area that you saw at
Yes.
or around the hands and the forearms?
That's correct.
Okay. You also took blood samples, did you not?
Yes.
And what types of blood samples did you take from Ms. Clarkson?
I took 3 separate samples. One is from the heart. These are all for toxicology studies, except for the one that I'll tell you in a second. The other one I took is from the groin area. Down here, it's called femoral blood. I took that one. Number 3, I took a purple top tube. And some of you are familiar with that. If you go to your own doctor, you'll see the different tubes that color tops that they draw your blood in. One of them is called a purple top, and I used one of those on this case, and that's specifically for what's called DNA typing, and that'll go off to the sheriff's department in this case for further studies if necessary.
The other two samples, the femoral, and when you indicated the groin area, you're talking about taking a sample from the femoral artery, correct?
Actually, it's either artery or vein.
Okay. Then the other sample you took for toxicology was from the actual heart area.
Yes.
Were these submitted for toxicological study?
Yes.
Were they submitted specifically or tested for blood alcohol content?
Yes.
Of the heart blood versus the femoral blood, is one more accurate in terms of what we all consider, for purposes of driving while intoxicated or DUI laws, is one more accurate in terms of BAC or blood alcohol content?
Well, from my experience,
I think I will sustain the objection, and you may lay a foundation as to that if you wish.
Sure. Do you normally take some sort of a blood sample and submit it for toxicological analysis?
yes.
In your experience, how many times do you think you've done this in the 3,300 autopsies that you've done?
That would probably be most of them, maybe about 3,000 of those.
All right. And is that toxicology done in an effort to find the actual blood alcohol content of a decedent?
Yes.
And who does that actual toxicological analysis?
Our laboratory in-house at the LA County Coroner's Office.
All right. And that's a certified laboratory?
Yes, it is.
When you normally take a blood alcohol, or when you receive blood alcohol content analysis back from the your own lab, which of the numbers, do the numbers always match, the heart blood versus the femoral blood?
Sometimes they do, because it's a water-soluble component of alcohol. They should be pretty close, but sometimes they're off by 0.2, et cetera. That's not uncommon to see.
Is there a medical reason why the heart blood analysis toxicology versus the femoral blood analysis, that in that toxicology might be different?
It may be that because when you die, blood tends to centralize more in the heart, particularly stimulant drugs, and that's why they might be a little higher than they would be out in the peripheral area in the groin. So the more accurate one to look at is in the groin area or the femoral blood.
So when someone dies, because the heart is the mechanism that pumps the blood, is it accurate to say that blood begins to centralize and pool in or around the heart area?
Yes.
Could that falsely elevate a toxicological analysis from blood taken in that area?
It can, yes.
What was and that's why you believe that it's more accurate to take the femoral blood for BAC rather than the heart blood for BAC, correct?
Yes.
Did you receive the toxicology analysis for both the femoral blood and the heart blood from Ms. Clarkson?
Yes.
And with regard to alcohol specifically, what were the findings?
Alcohol in the femoral blood is 0.12, and in the heart blood it was 0.14.
In your opinion, which of those two numbers is more closely reflective of Ms. Clarkson's blood alcohol content at the time of her death?
It's the 0.12 from the femoral blood.
Did you also submit for toxicology well, I guess I should ask it this way, were there any other things tested for in the toxicological analysis?
Generally, we'll do a screen which will cover cocaine, speed, marijuana, drug known as PCP, of course heroin, codeine, what are called barbiturates, or really strong sedatives. We'll test for those. I went a step further and tested what are called bases, and those will include, for instance, like psychiatric meds, some blood pressure meds, and other actually medications, stronger narcotics, and sometimes we'll pick up. It's a long list, but that's what I did.
Was there any other did the test reveal any other drugs in Ms. Clarkson's system?
Yes.
Could you describe those for the jurors, please?
It revealed a drug known as Aleve, A-L-E-V-E. That's an over-the-counter medication at a normal level. It also revealed Vicodin, a painkiller. That level, if I recall, is 0.07. And that's getting toward the lower end of what's called therapeutic by our postmortem data standards that we use in our lab.
What does therapeutic level mean?
That's basically a range in which the drug has optimal effects that a doctor would try to achieve putting a patient on. And in this case, for Vicodin, it would be 0.03 to 0.27. You want to stay within that range. Getting any higher, not that it's bad but they try to get you within a therapeutic range, it's called, and that's what I mean by that.
So in other words, there was no indication that Ms. Clarkson was abusing the Vicodin.
Yeah, I'm sorry, from that I cannot tell you, but at this moment in time, I can just tell you it's at that level.
There was not an abusive level in her bloodstream.
Not higher than 0.07.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that is a therapeutic level.
Or a lower part of therapeutic, that's correct.
Even beneath that, which a doctor might normally prescribe for pain medication.
That's correct.
All right. Or for pain relief, I should say.
Yes.
Okay. Doctor, taking all of what we've talked about this morning into consideration, were you able to make a determination as to the actual cause of death of Ms. Clarkson?
Yes.
And what was your determination?
A gunshot wound of head and neck.
And on what do you base that determination, Doctor?
I base that on the autopsy findings that we've gone through this morning with the internal gunshot wound, the path that it took through the oral cavity to the back of the throat, fracturing the neck bone, severing or tearing apart the spinal cord, going onto the base of the skull, fracturing that apart, tearing apart of the dura that I described earlier, causing that to bleed. And of course, there's two mechanisms of death. You have the brain and of course the spinal cord, which we've gone over.
Based on the autopsy finding alone, in other words, based on what you reviewed on the autopsy table alone, could you make a determination as to the manner of death?
No, I could not.
Is it appropriate, pursuant to the protocols of the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office, to go outside the actual autopsy itself and look at extrinsic evidence or additional evidence to determine, in your mind, in your expert opinion, what the manner of death may be?
Yes.
Did you do that in this case?
Yes.
Were you able to make a determination, in your opinion, as a forensic pathologist, as to the manner of death for Lana Clarkson?
Yes.
And what is that manner of death in your
The manner
opinion?
of death in this case is homicide.
What do you base that opinion on, Dr. Pena?
I base it on a number of factors. Number one, circumstantial. A statement is made by the alleged perpetrator as he comes out of his residence holding a gun and makes a statement, "I think I shot or killed someone." That's quite important to me. Going on from there, when I went to the scene, it's not a typical scene for a suicide. Ms. Clarkson was at another person's residence. Most people who commit suicide are going to do it in private, not at another one's home, especially a person they've never met before, from what I understand. There are exceptions to that. We have in LA County, for instance, the suicide by cop we see a lot. We have family disputes where children are involved, but they know each other, usually family or friends that witness it because, again, there's a custody dispute. Those are other areas that make up that difference, mainly from my opinion. I've never seen a case reported where someone's gone out, a stranger, gone to their home, magically come up with a gun and shoot themselves. Going on from there, I just said she never met this person before, didn't know the home, been there for the first time that evening on February 3rd. Other thing I factored in, when I looked at the home and I'm there, only one drawer is open to the left where that gun supposedly was retrieved. There's a holster there which holds the gun. I asked the sheriff department people there later, at the time I was there, because these thoughts are going through my mind. Are there any other drawers open around the home? And I asked that for a reason. If Ms. Clarkson truly wanted to find the gun, she would have gone throughout the home, opening all the drawers looking for a gun. How would she have known where the gun is in that home at that moment in time, at that particular time frame at the home? That bothered me a lot. I thought about these things, again, put in totality of everything presented to me to come to this decision. That's another factor. The other thing I looked into, she's slouched in a chair. I have no problem with that. She's sitting down. What bothered me a lot, she has a purse on her right shoulder, this purse. It's just on the right shoulder, and counsel, if you look at me, I can't remember exactly, but it's almost ready to come off. And it's hanging off to the right side of the chair. That purse bothered me a lot because I find it very difficult for someone to take a weapon, no matter if they're going to put it in front, put it to the side of their head, maybe put it to the other side of the head and shoot themselves, and that purse staying on the shoulder. The purse should have been taken off and dropped. Okay, so I factored that in. The other thing I looked at is that she meets this, again, the defender, alleged perpetrator, the night. She realizes later who he is, and in my thinking, perhaps she thought this could boost her
there
career.
he is.
It shows hope.
Perfect timing for, we've got the field ghoul cam. Boom, the dead-on shot. As you can see, that is the dead-on shot of what you're seeing there to the side slightly. An obstruction covering partial part of his face there. We have the complete dead-on live ghoul cam for you folks, just in case. Thanks, everyone, for hanging and banging this morning. Really appreciate it. You know what's up. We don't fuck around. I'm going to let my coffee cool before I even get a drink, before I burn my face off.
It shows to me this woman had hope to go out with someone that evening, and maybe he could give her a new direction in her life, you know?
Jay with the share, Brooklyn with the share. Thank you, guys.
What kind of business they're in.
Appreciate it, guys.
Whatever. So I looked at that.
You guys are the
So that's
best.
mainly the scene stuff and circumstantial I looked at. Kind of unusual
Black
for
economist in the
medical
house.
examiners to
What's
do that,
up?
because usually we have other people do that for us. So this is kind of new for me. The other second component is called the physical evidence. Very simple, and Dr. Lynn Hill will come and go through this in detail with you, but I'll just give you a brief synopsis of what information was provided to me. And just two pieces of information, very simple, is the gun itself. The gun that was used in this case was white. There's blood in the recesses of that gun. On the topical elevations, they call it, of that gun, there was no blood there, where there should have been blood. And I'll give you an example. You remember when you were a kid, you go to like Baskin Robbins, you get that cone, they put ice cream on it. It starts to melt, right? That ice cream, I remember as a kid, I used to do this all the time, it gets on your fingers. And it gets in the crevices there. Then you get the napkins, right? You start to wipe off the ice cream where you know it was, but you know it's in the crevice too, right? Same thing with the gun, the same principle. We know there was blood on those elevations of that gun, but they're wiped away. Not only was it wiped away in that one area, it was wiped away in several areas of that gun, in which Dr. Harrell will explain to you, which is far beyond my comprehension. So I'm just giving you a little synopsis, but I factor that in. It tells me someone manipulated the gun, which should not happen. Number two of the physical evidence, the perpetrator, alleged perpetrator, pants.
You made it, Gabby.
Dark
Nice.
ones. If some of you have a white pants,
It's probably hard to go to bed.
front pocket, the
Break
left
away
front
from that.
pocket,
I totally get it.
where you put your change in, you invert it out. It's white. That had significant blood stains in it. At least the left front one did. I can't speak for the right one. I don't recall, but I know the left front pocket was stained significantly with blood stains. So it tells me either someone or the perpetrator, alleged perpetrator, put bloody hands into the pocket, or maybe the weapon went in the pocket. I don't know. Something went in the pocket. All this blood, I'm telling you, comes back when they do this DNA typing to Miss Clarkson. All the blood is hers, no one else's. So that's important. And finally, what I looked at was medical history, what's called a medical review of her charts, available to me at the time she had passed away, and thereafter for a few months. I got medical records that came in batches. And then just a few months ago, I got a whole bunch of other medical records I reviewed thoroughly.
Shit. I don't mind to do bells again. Anybody that came in late, we'll do double bells this morning. Everybody, welcome to Murder Church. Can't do it without the bells. And sometimes we do double bells. I have no problem with that. Can you see the steam in the camera? Probably not. The bells are ringing. Now we need this one. Ladies and gentlemen, in this corner.
Is Ms. Clarkson had no evidence to indicate depression, any psychiatric disorder for depression. And I'm not just talking about the general brief sadness, periods of sadness we all experience in our life.
Morning, Drew.
This is just normal periods of sadness if she had depression that she went through, and I'll explain that later if necessary. But she had no diagnosis, no psychotherapist report that I saw, no psychiatry report. But she was taking two medications. One's called Elavil, E-L-A-V-I-L, and the other one's called Paxil, P-A-X-I-L. Those are generally two psychiatric medications given for depression. However, the doctor she was seeing that was giving her those medications is a neurologist. locally here in Los Angeles. He was working with her because Miss Clarkson had a chronic problem, what are called headaches. When I reviewed the records carefully, they couldn't
that like
figure
no
out
one's
whether
ever heard of
it
a headache.
was tension, migraine, or what they call cluster headaches, or different forms. It was difficult to diagnose. They're trying different plans out or treatments on Miss Clarkson. So they find that perhaps, let's try Elavil first. So this one doctor tried Elavil for about a month, and she had some side effects with it, so they stopped that one. And the next, from October of 2001, I believe, to August of 2002, she went on Paxil. But again, these are for headaches. Elavil and Paxil work in the brain where they elevate certain brain
There we go.
chemistry and chemicals in our brain.
Gotta get them bells in
It's
ya.
thought by the neurologists that these chemicals then will regulate. If they get in higher amounts, that's the idea of giving these medications. That way your brain chemistry chemicals will get higher and they'll affect the blood vessels, which can trigger the headaches. That's the idea of how these drugs may work. They've actually had good success. So they were hoping by trying these with Mrs. Clarkson, because she suffered for these for years, and it was very, not debilitating,
Headaches
but
are
she
the
went on and
worst.
worked.
Cassie has bad headaches.
But it got in the
Seems
way of
so
her
miserable,
life,
like-
but she kept going on. I found her to be a hopeful person from the notes I read. Other major thing I looked at is any past or previous suicide attempt, or what were called ideations. There was no history of any previous suicide attempt. I looked carefully at her wrists and arms, of course, prior to the autopsy, and there were no hesitation cuts or marks. What someone will commonly do if they have a problem with suicide, and we see this a lot at our office, they'll use razor blades and start cutting along, experimenting. They'll work up the forearm, or they may use a knife. But gradually they'll start working a little bit. There's something going on with that person. It's not, of course, appropriate action. She had no evidence of that and no documentation in the medical records. Other thing important that I factored in, she had all the medications in the world to use to commit suicide. She had Elavil. She had Paxil. She took them as prescribed. She had them, if she wanted to store them and hold on to them for 3 months, she could have done that and overdosed and say, I had enough of this. If she had the suicidal problem or depression, she did not. Her work was not affected. She's a very sociable, it seemed like, person from what I read. People with major depression, they call it, that's a clinical diagnosis. Their social aspect of their life will be disrupted. They won't be able to go out and mingle with people. It's very difficult to go out. It's very debilitating. Depression, any of these other anxiety disorders are the same way. They can cause havoc on your life. You don't want to even leave your home sometimes. There was no indication of that for Ms. Clarkson. She loved to go out, in fact. The other thing, occupation-wise, they're not going to want to work. This woman went out, even though she lost a part here, maybe in a play, and went on. She tried. She tried, and she kept going on. So there's no indication, I just gave you, of these factors from a medical standpoint that Ms. Clarkson was ever suicidal or was going to be, but I can't speak for that, I'm sorry. And what else can I think of? Oh, she did not own a firearm. She did not possess a firearm. The two major risk factors from my experience and discussions that we have in our office, because we have what are called psychological autopsies at the coroner's office, one of the two factors are owning a firearm, having the possession of it. It doesn't put you at risk, but if you have a tendency to depression, it's not a good idea. The other is, of course, hold on a second, I'm blanking out, is, let's see, owning a firearm, excuse me one second.
Sure.
I'm trying to remember what I have down.
He got off track
Was
there.
there any indication, doctor, that
He's rolling, boy.
Ms. Clarkson was systematically getting her affairs together to divest herself of anything? Any indication in anything that you reviewed that she was getting rid of things, getting rid of possessions, worldly possessions, and
No.
things of that nature?
Not at all.
Did that have anything to do with your opinions and conclusions in this case?
Yes.
Do you normally see such activity in someone who is classically suicidal?
You can, actually. That's one of the factors.
Okay. Dr. Pena, based on everything that you've explained to the jurors this morning, based on not only
He's
your
about to leave.
your
He's like,
anatomical findings, your autopsy
nope.
findings, but based on the medical records that you reviewed, the crime scene that you reviewed,
First drink, baby.
the indications
We're
from
warm.
the Sheriff's Department about circumstances surrounding the actual perpetration of this incident, including the limo driver's statements about what Mr. Spector said immediately thereafter. Did you take everything into consideration based on the totality of all the circumstances in reaching your opinions and conclusions?
Yes, I did.
And based on all of those totality of circumstances, based on everything that you've just told us about, what is your opinion as to the manner of Miss Clarkson's death?
This is a homicide.
Thank you, Doctor.
Before cross-examination, do we need to have a hearing at all?
We do.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, of the
Uh-oh.
jury, keeping in mind the admonition, if you would step into the...
Before we get crossed, we're going to get
the
some kind of
jury room,
hearing.
hopefully we'll get back to you in a short time. Yes, juror number 2? Oh, you still have the pictures? Yeah, go ahead and hand them down to Mr. Dixon. Thank you. All right, so if you go ahead in the jury room, we'll call you as soon as we're ready. The jurors and alternates have left the courtroom. Yes. Mr. Jackson, you indicated you thought we needed a hearing, so...
Your Honor, it's based on Mr. Plourd's offer of proof this morning. I can't make heads or tails out of this motion yet. I mean, obviously, I haven't had a chance. I've been busy. I simply need a chance to ask Mr. Plourd, what is it that he's seeking to bring in that requires this motion? I simply want to know what it is. I want an offer of proof of exactly what it is that he's seeking to bring in. If it has something to do with Pumpkin Pie and Jennifer Hayes, then I think we need to talk about it. If it goes far afield of kind of what I expect the cross-examination to be,
Dave,
which
get
is
in here,
based on
bud.
her medical records, et cetera, that I don't have any real problem with that. But if we start getting into tangential witnesses who have not testified and hearsay and double
Little church
hearsay and
service this
triple hearsay
morning?
statements, I've got a real problem with that.
Okay.
I think that puts the cart way before the horse, and it rings bells and lets the cow out of the barn and every other analogy I can think of.
Hear different things from Texas lawyers than I do from other. Go ahead, Mr. Plourd.
In responding to the cow out of the barn analogy, I would indicate that there's been a lot of door opening as far as what this witness relied upon to reach certain opinions or conclusions as to both cause and manner of death. And I'm going to, ask some follow-up questions because he wasn't specific as to exactly what he reviewed. He alluded to statements, reports, state of mind type documentation, so forth. So I'm going to, before I get into any of those or all of those, I'm going to, ask him some certain follow-up questions. I didn't really file a motion. I simply filed a trial brief because I didn't know exactly what the testimony would be. But my sense is, in listening to Dr. Pena, is that he considered a lot of different types of material that were outside the typical scope. You mentioned the psychological autopsy type thing. There were lots of records that went into that effort and so forth. So, including the witnesses that Mr. Jackson referred to. So, I may very well get into those at some point. I'm certainly not going to get into them before the noon hour. I'm going to look over my notes and so forth and ask him, well, did you consider this? Did you consider that? In other words, to see how far he went, when did he do it, at what point in time, relative to his call in this case, which was made back in 2003. So I think until we get to that further explanation, I don't really know how to respond to the people's in limine request, which is essentially what they're making, is that we cannot get into certain areas when essentially the door has been opened quite wide. We proceed. So.
I agree the door's been open, but it doesn't mean it's been torn off the barn, so to speak. The question, I think what the prosecution, and I may be speaking for them, and if I'm wrong,
Oh, it's
I'm
Judge
sure they'll
Diehard,
correct
man.
me, is how
He
much
should just be
you're
the
going to be
judge of
able
the
to
country.
present to this witness by way of hypotheticals and what you're basing it on. In other words, if it's completely inadmissible, I think that's concerned. Is if it's
incredibly
evidence that
fair, I
certainly
think.
can come in and is otherwise admissible, is did you consider this? Did you consider the possibility of this? As long as it's based on admissible evidence, and I think that's what they're talking about. Is that correct?
It is, Your Honor. The court put it very well. What we're concerned with is, I'll focus the court's attention because my attention
exactly
is
where I'm at,
focused on this.
Dave.
Mr. Plourd just referred to it, and I expect that he may attempt
know.
to cross-examine the witness on Pumpkin Pie and Jennifer Hayes and it was someone else, the guy,
I hate pumpkin pie. Who likes pumpkin pie?
Anyway, a couple of other
A lot of people
things.
do. I'm not a pumpkin guy in general. As we
That's who I'm talking
get
about. I
closer
just
to
can't
the
remember his
pumpkin
name.
spice,
In any
pumpkin
event,
season stuff.
Those witnesses, my problem
Never
is
liked
this.
the old pumpkin
Once the defense
flavor or taste.
goes toward asking the witness whether or not they considered, would it change
People
your
that
opinion
love
if
it,
you
though.
were told blank, and starts reading line by line things that Pumpkin Pie supposedly or allegedly has said, or Jennifer Hayes has said, or the director of the play, etc. It gives the defense absolutely no incentive.
If you smell what the priest is cooking, it's pumpkin pie.
Whatsoever to ever call those witnesses to the stand, ever. That bell will have been rung, and the court can make whatever inquiry it wants. And we kind of ran past this with another witness dealing with Melissa Grosvenor, saying, "Hey, look, if you're going to cross on this issue, you better think twice, and you better be able to back it up." There's
So my grandma used to eat
There's
it.
absolutely
It's a cool
no
whip.
recourse that the court would have if, in fact, they cross-examine on Pumpkin Pie or they cross-examine on Jennifer Hayes and then decide in their case in chief, you know what? We've decided
Damn.
we're going to rest on our laurels. We're not going to call those witnesses.
Itty pie? You just came through here and said, fuck every pie kind? Fuck, damn. An apple pie? A chocolate pie? A cherry pie?
The court can't force them to call them. And then I would be in a position, or the prosecution would be in a position
they're so gross to me.
of complete disadvantage
That
because
smell
the jurors will have
kills
heard
me.
all of this information without subjecting any of those witnesses to the crucible of cross-examination. It puts
Like
us
the fake pumpkin smell. Like an actual pumpkin pie, a fresh one, doesn't. That smells amazing. I don't like the taste of it, but I think it smells amazing and fresh. But like that pumpkin weird ass fucking spice smell that's in everything around October, September. Ugh.
in a very tenuous position. And there is absolutely zero prejudice to forcing the defense to wait until their case in chief put those witnesses on and let us cross-examine those witnesses, which we intend to do vigorously. Then if, in fact, that evidence comes out, simply call Dr. Pena back to the stand and ask him, hey, now that this is before the court, would it change your opinion if? I certainly don't think that I'm asking for too much to ask the court to simply
never had any
limit this
mincemeat pie either.
cross-examination to the universe of information that the witnesses testified about on direct examination. I mean, the defense even went so far as to, I believe, as to mail the witness, Dr. Pena, certain information and reports from, I think, from Dr. DeMaio, wherever Dr. DeMaio went. I think just to be able to set up a certain cross-examination on those issues so they can say, have you reviewed this, or why didn't you, or would you please?
Am I confused? I think that the pumpkin pie is an analogy that they're using for the motion that they're kind of like alluding to here. Like, I'm not 100% sure either, but
Don't have a real big problem with that. I have a big problem with the actual witnesses who are not subject to any cross-examination or not subject to any limiting as far as their testimony is concerned. I just don't see the prejudice in making them wait.
Thank you, Mr. Ford.
Yeah, I filed a trial brief that basically, I think, at least in my mind, gave sort of the general concept is that experts, if they rely on certain matters or consider certain matters or
you know, cheesecake is
didn't consider matters
dank
that
as hell.
typically an expert
Love some cheesecake.
would consider in the position that the expert is in. And, you know, I did that sort of in a general framework. And I also attached the documentation that shows that the district attorney's office sent 30 separate items, and it's Exhibit E to my trial brief, where they sent 30 different reports, the entire hard drive of the computer, to Dr. Pena to review and consider as to manner of death. So I wasn't really making a motion limiting. I was simply, you know, putting the court. I think this issue is going to come up. This is the law. It's very broad. Experts, especially when it comes to manner of death, they're in a position where experts can rely upon, and they do rely upon, a lot of different material. And I think you can read between the lines with respect to Dr. Pena's testimony. They can consider reports,
Pumpkin pie.
report statements of people that
Hey,
knew them,
listen here, Pumpkin.
knew the defendant, etc., so that they can factor all of that in coming to an opinion. All experts tend to do that. I didn't send Dr. Pena any of that material. What I forwarded to Dr. Pena were two published documents.
That's awesome, Gabby. That's a
that were
great name.
published in
A
the
nickname.
medical journal.
Especially if you're born on
he
Halloween.
called me back and thanked me for that because I called to make sure he got it. He said one of them he'd already reviewed and considered, the other one he hadn't, but he thanked me for forwarding that to me and so forth. But so I didn't send him police reports or anything like that. What the people are doing now is they're, to use an old adage that my grandfather used to tell myself and my brothers, once the pig gets under the fence, it never quits running. They've opened the door. And basically they've opened the door to all this whole scope of materials. And now they want to limit the scope to certain materials from certain people, but not others. They want the court to disallow the defense to say, well, I considered all these materials from this friend and that friend, but I didn't consider these other friends. For example, there's a district attorney investigative report where the decedent
Had to look up rhubarb pie after Debbie mentioned it in the chat there, and I don't think I like rhubarb, which again, the older I've gotten, my taste buds have gotten a lot more mature. I have to admit that. I like stuff now that I didn't used to like 10, 20 years ago, so I'd give it a shot.
makes a statement.
That's what it looks like anyways. Rhubarb pie. Debbie was talking about. You put a dollop of whipped cream on that too? I don't think I've ever had rhubarb.
To the effect that I want to kill myself in a short period of time right before her death. I think that's fair game. I don't want to quote the exact language from the report, but that was one that didn't even come from us. That came from the district attorney's investigation. I don't know whether Dr. Pena, considered and reviewed that report as part of these materials or not. But I'm certainly going to ask him whether he did. And if he didn't, I'm going to ask him about that particular report. I'm going to go there, so to speak, because I think the door has been open to that state of mind type information. The same would be true of information that's from the decedent's computer, given the fact that there has been some testimony from Dr. Pena about her state of mind and inferences that he drew regarding her state of mind from various things. I think her own writings, whether they be emails or her...
So, okay, what's the difference between a cobbler and a pie? I'm Googling that right now.
Statements or letters or things that she writes that are on her personal computer that were sent to Dr. Pena by the district attorney's office. Why is that at least open to question as to whether he reviewed and considered it? And if he didn't, could it change his opinion if certain things were contained?
The AI that we now get answers on the internet with says, let me make that larger for y'all. Says cobblers and pies are similar fruit desserts, but they differ in the placement of the dough and the type of dough used. Let's read further, shall we? Pies have at least one crust, usually rolled out pastry, and the fruit is placed on top. Pies may also have a top crust and sometimes extra layers of dough between the crusts. Pies require more prep time and a longer bake time than cobblers to fully cook the crust and allow the filling to set. Cobblers have fruit on the top and a dolloped or dropped biscuit-like topping on the top. I'm already confused. The dough and fruit cooked together. Oh, so it's, the dough on the pie is, crusting and, it's inside of it, but, I guess they cook simultaneously or even like fuse in the cobbler. And the topping's name comes from its cobblered texture, which is created by spooning or dropping it over the fruit so some filling can still be seen. Cobblers are generally easier to make than pies and don't require special baking tins. Interesting. Cobblers are sometimes described as kind of a fruit pie. Okay, all right. Interesting. This is a cobbler, right? Yeah, this is a cobbler. A cobbler is more like a casserole type of dessert-ish. Whoa, this looks fucking good. Jeez. That one looks good. Damn, I like some crispiness. Oh, man. All right.
within that information. I think
Too early
all
for that.
is fair game under this. In other words, the pig is under the fence as far as and I hate to use that term, but that's the first term.
Was anybody raised in the city?
What is happening? The barn door's been ripped off. The pig's under the fence, ready to be fucked by this guy. What's going on? Let's calm down.
Don't you have some urban analogies?
Judge, I grew up in an agriculture area, and we got jobs in the summer, and we were outstanding in our fields working on farms.
Okay.
So basically, that's where we're at, Your Honor, and I think that we shouldn't be limited.
Can I just add one little thing
Yes.
also? I'm concerned about...
I'm learning to make the
that
cobbler.
part
Cobbler coming to
of Mr.
Patreon.
Jackson's argument where he indicated that we shouldn't
And
be
for
allowed
members.
to go in this now because to do that would advantage us in the sense that if we decide that we get what we want from Dr. Pena, then we wouldn't be in a position to have to be
I
forced
know.
to call either pumpkin
Still got a while
pie
before
or,
I eat. I usually eat after the streams. It's like 1,
let me suggest this
1:30.
first of all.
So I got to edit.
Ask the question.
I'm working on which everybody knows I have a wrestling channel as well, and I'd edit videos for that one. And I'm trying to finish something to get one out today. So as soon as this ends, I'm going to try to bust out probably another hour to get that wiped out and finished. And then I'll probably.
Mr. Jackson was very staged when he asked the question, asking Dr. Pena what his opinion was, and the word came out loud and clear, homicide. Now, if he had left it at that, that's fine, but he didn't do that. He went further, and he asked for all the backup reasons, which Dr. Pena provided a laundry list, turning to the jury, facing the jury, and presenting them with this laundry list of reasons, many of which touch on the areas that Mr. Plora desires to get into. A, the question shouldn't have been asked at that point if Mr. Jackson did not want us to get into it. And B, it doesn't disadvantage him. Let's take his hypothetical through logically. Let's assume that's correct, okay? Let's assume that Mr. Plora is satisfied with the answers he gets and makes a decision not to call, we decide as a team not to call either Ms. Hayes or Ms. Pye. What's to prevent them from calling? They don't like it. They don't like what they've got. They can put it on in rebuttal. And because these are witnesses who clearly have spoken before, and we've turned the materials over to Mr. Jackson, I don't think he'd have a very difficult argument making to this court that those two individuals could be taken as potentially hostile witnesses, and therefore he gets the privilege of cross-examination, and he's lost nothing. So I just wanted to add that because I don't want the court to get led astray on something like that. I don't think that's the case at all, and that would not be the lay of the land.
Hey, Jules, thanks for hanging out. Appreciate you coming through. Yeah, come through for some more murder churches, and do a lot of other streams as well. I appreciate you.
I
You
couldn't
too.
call a witness that I believe is suborning perjury. So I wouldn't call them.
Right, let me...
And Judge, I'm not being flip. I'm absolutely not being flip. It's a ridiculous argument for Mr. Rosen to suggest that we call Pumpkin Pie and Jennifer Hayes when we have every reason to believe that they're lying, either for financial gain or for their 15 minutes of fame or whatever it is. That having been said, I would also ask the court to consider, and I know the court's got a lot to consider, one of the things that we stayed completely away from was any indication. I think it's appropriate for Dr. Pena to comment on the medical records that were supplied him. I've got no problem with that. Vigorous, vehement cross-examination on.
There we go. Taryn coming through with some love. I'll be uploading multiple recipes to Discord this week. Luckily, my grandma was home. Was a home economics teacher, and of all her recipes, we know how to cook in the South. So, love that. Yes, they do. I'm from the South. Southern soul food is the best. Fuck yeah, please. And I'm going to drop the Discord link right now. Anybody, this is a free Discord. And again, I'm trying to grow it with more people, more folks. We're having more conversations happening all the time. That's free. Jump in there. Get in there. And you're going to be getting some fucking recipes.
On Ms. Clarkson's medical records.
Yeah.
No problem with that. Because the medical records can somewhat be vetted. I don't have any argument that as to their accuracy. The problem I've got are with the actual witnesses who say X, Y, and Z about what I heard Lana Clarkson say. One of them, granted, was in response to a prosecution investigator, but she flipped 180 degrees. When Pumpkin Pie was originally interviewed, she said, "Oh my God, I can't believe this. I can't believe Mr. Spector would kill her. She'd never kill herself. She's not suicidal. She's a happy person." And then somehow, somewhere, she flipped 180 degrees and said,
an analogy at all.
She wanted to kill herself. That having been said, that's the
girl,
kind of
get in here.
information that I think lacks a basic foundation. And if, in fact, the defense begins to get into that, then, of course, this particular expert would need to hear a full explanation of the two people that were in that foyer area, the other of whom is Philip Spector. And his, I think I've counted 19 separate incidents involving guns or the use of violence or the threatened use of violence. And would that door now be open for me to ask the doctor if he's considered all those 19 separate incidents, including the admissible 1101B incidents, as well as the 15 other incidents that I've jotted down over the weekend that heretofore have not been admitted? I would simply leave the court with that and submit.
Mr. Pork?
Yeah, for example, I'll get 2 binders here. This is on each one. There's 30 separate reports, emails. These are all sent to Dr. Pena by the district attorney's office. I mean, I would think that that's fair game, along with the computer hard drive. So that was sort of the start. And many of the witnesses that they referred to, were some of the emails and so forth that were on the computer, people that she emailed. These statements are going to be, I think, fair game, because basically Dr. Pena discussed more than just a medical record. She discussed state of mind that he gleaned from obviously conversations of others, her lifestyle, her motivation to become an actress, which I think we can get into a lot of different things relating to that. There are emails where she makes statements that I want to chuck it all. I'm not going to quote her exactly at this point, but I want to end this all, get my affairs in order. Statements like that where she's making those. So it's just not one person, saying that, I think she was depressed. And whether or not there's contradictory statements, I think that all gets to be factored in. But, there's got to be, the door has certainly been open quite wide. And so I want to proceed with that. It doesn't look like we're going to get very far before lunch, but I'm just going to be asking them foundational questions between now and the noon hour. I'd like to get some time in on that, because I think depending upon how he describes these materials that are either reviewed or not reviewed, then I think the court is going to have to just take it issue by issue, and I'll have to, basically lay some type of a foundation as to the types of materials, the scopes of the materials, etc. And then, the court cuts me off, the court cuts me off. But I think that at this point, I don't think the court should be making any hard and fast determinations as to what types of materials can't be cross-examined on, because the nature of this opinion is you consider a lot of different types of...
Preliminarily, and I think to some degree it has to be done on almost a question-by-question basis, but speaking in general categories, seems to me if the defense, for instance, I've seen these emails, unless the prosecution is claiming those aren't Ms. Clarkson's
I just got in the
emails.
Discord, hell yeah.
If in an email
You're going to love it in there.
Indicates whether she's depressed, quote, she wants to chuck it all, or whatever the specific quote, then clearly that's rather dependable evidence that's going to come in one way or the other, and the doctor can be cross-examined as, did you consider this? The area I think it's a greater concern is what may be inadmissible testimony, and then just to throw it out, did you think about this? But there's a way to do it, and the way to do it is to present to the witness in the following form. If there was evidence that the defendant said, that the victim said so-and-so, Ms. Clarkson said so-and-so, or if there's evidence that she did this or that, would that affect your opinion without indicating that the evidence exists? And the jury can be admonished that this is being received for the purpose of showing how it affects the doctor's opinion. If evidence is later presented to support it, that's fine, and then you can consider it for whatever purpose that evidence comes in, and if not, it's any hypothetical, as they'll be instructed, is only as good as the facts contained in the hypothetical, and if the facts turn out not to be true, then it affects the hypothetical, and I think that's the best way to do it. We'll have to do it pretty much on a question-by-question basis.
Yes, Your Honor.
But I suggest that you approach it in that manner, that if this was presented to you when it's not clear, if it's not clear that the evidence is otherwise going to be admissible. We'll just have to do it question by question. Okay. Those are your basic sort of ground rules. All right, let's bring the jurors in the alternate back. Get a few minutes in.
All right, where are we going next here? Part 3 of Dr. Pena. Continuing, got another hour 21.
Good morning.
Wanted to start
Keep rolling
off
here,
by
guys. Thanks everyone for hanging out this morning. I really appreciate it. Yeah, we're going to keep on rocking and rolling. I just want to put in here real quick. If you haven't hit the like yet, please do so. That really helps us out here at Publicly Buzzed. Got a lot of cool stuff coming up here soon. I've got some stuff that I need to plan on the back end. This Thursday, I have Chris Dewitt coming on to hang out with me and Dan. We're going to be watching a movie, so get ready for that. Tuesday nights, another episode of Murder Church, of course. And I have something that it's probably going to be a little bit of extra plan. It's not going to be this week, but I want to put together something with... I'm not even going to say it yet. I'm actually going to keep that under wraps, because if I say it, you're kind of going to get an idea of where I'm going. And I just know that I have something planned that's cool. I just have to I literally have to talk to somebody to see if how they feel about it. But I think that they're going to be cool. I've hung out with them once on stream. If that could be a hint of any kind. But yeah, I'm going to see if I can get them on here as a guest to hang out. But yeah, thank you all so much for hanging out this morning. We're going to keep rolling.
Just talking about some generalities. We only have a few minutes here before.
Yeah, I'm making a recipes tab in the Discord right now.
Recess, and you've been on the witness stand all morning, and you talked about you being a forensic pathologist, and that is a specialty within the field of pathology. Is that correct?
Boom.
Yes.
There it is.
And what does the word forensic mean? If you could just kind of give the jurors an explanation of what forensic means as it relates to the field of pathology in the subject
Put the first
of medicine.
jip in there.
It's basically a study of basically solving problems of sudden and unexpected deaths, as referring to pathology, but incorporating
Get in there.
alluded to earlier, causes, mechanisms, and basically we're dealing with unexpected deaths. But it's a medical legal part to it, meaning, for instance, like the gunshot wound case, we're going to recover a bullet perhaps. That's evidence value that could be brought into court. So forensics encompasses all the areas of pathology, whether it be a natural death, accident from drugs, et cetera, and it's putting in together a totality of information. You can't rely just on one factor, and it's an interesting field, and that's why I went into it, but it deals a lot with medicine and basics, and that's basically it.
Okay, so a pathologist is somebody that specializes within the field of medicine, but not necessarily regarding legal matters?
Forensics, correct, but yeah.
Like you mentioned anatomical, like in a hospital where you're looking at tissues and things of that nature?
Yes.
Okay, and forensic really deals with legal. You can have like a forensic criminalist or forensic psychiatrist. That deals with legal matters, not necessarily just regarding medical matters, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so when you come into court, for example, to give manner of death opinions, that's the forensic aspect of pathology. Is that true?
That's correct.
And you mentioned that you're board certified as a forensic pathologist. Do you have to take some tests to do that, to become board certified?
Yes.
Okay, and you have to have certain level of experience before you can become board certified. Is that true?
That's correct.
Oh shit, Sheila! If you liked Evil Dead, you will love Deadstream. I think I already forgot the name I put in there. I had to double look. I'm horrible with names, but yeah, Deadstream. That's it. Check that movie out, guys. It's on Shudder. If you like Evil Dead, so like it's a modern take on a horror movie, really, in a weird way, because dude, this is actually funny. So I always just watch YouTube at home, a lot of times in the living room. Who doesn't, right? There's so much good stuff on YouTube. So I'm always just chilling on there. Cassie didn't see me go to Shudder to pick a movie. She was on her phone, and she looks up, and she doesn't even realize I'm not watching a YouTube video or show. Because the way Deadstream is, it's this guy who's basically he's basically a live streamer, and he's going to go into this haunted house, all right? But he's pretty entertaining also. Like, he's the actor that plays it's killing it. So he's going in, like, the whole time you're seeing he's got the head cam on, like he's got, devices, he's reading the chats, like you see the chats up on the screen sometimes. Apparently he had gotten canceled at one point, and this is him trying to make a comeback. Like, that's in the story, just sort of. But, the creep factor of the house is like really good, and it's really well made. But I say Evil Dead because more like Evil Dead 2, I would say. Like, Evil Dead 2 was definitely wild as fuck, but it was more on the horror side than the comedy side, where like 2, more of a mix and maybe even a little bit more funny, absolutely insane and brutal and actually fucking scary as well. But I would push it more towards Evil Dead 2 just for the wildness of what kind of happens, because yeah, he ends up like, yeah, it's wild. Let's just say he enacts a curse that he should not have fucked with, and it gets wild as shit. Check it out, Deadstream on Shudder. I don't want to give away too much.
And how many board-certified pathologists are in the United States?
I was
pleasantly
surprised.
That's a very common
More in
profession
Brooklyn.
or uncommon?
It's very uncommon. I think there are just about, I want to say, maybe 400, or between 300 and 400 that are actually practicing right now.
Okay, and is it do board-certified pathologists, do they ever look at a case like you looked at this particular case? Do they ever look at it and maybe disagree as to the ultimate outcome?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, and they can look at the same facts and circumstances to both be board-certified, but they'll come to a different conclusion for some reason?
Yes.
Okay, and now when you're a forensic pathologist, this specialty of the law and medicine that you're involved in, how do you keep up with the advances in your particular field? What do you look at? Do you read, obviously you don't read just the general newspaper, you look at something special?
Yes, I rely on textbooks from authors that are well respected in our field. I look at journals. There are 2 in particular. There are many more, and that's basically it.
Okay, let's talk about.
Hey, Kyle, have a great week.
One of them
Thanks for hanging out.
Medical Legal Investigation of Death by Spitz and Fisher.
Yes.
Is that one of the? And I actually have a copy of it here. Is that like one of the premier textbooks in the field of the forensic pathology?
Yes, it is.
And you actually have a copy of that yourself, is that correct?
Yes.
And as far as a research or a tool that you use, you rely upon this type of textbook as well as others. Is that true?
I did.
And you actually refer to it in this particular case as to issues, isn't that true?
I did.
And is it also true that, well, let me ask you this. You mentioned journals, 2 journals that were prominent in the field. In the United States, or actually in the world, are there specialty journals in the area of forensic pathology? In other words, where that's what they deal with and nothing else?
I'm not too familiar with those.
Is there a journal called the American Journal of Forensic Medicine and Pathology? Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Is that the premier journal in your field that you keep up with advances on in your field?
Yes, I do. That's correct.
Is it the only journal that actually deals with only forensic medicine and pathology? You know, only journal published in the United States, if not the world?
No, there are others.
That deal exclusively with forensic medicine and pathology, as opposed to, let's say, other journals that deal in part with this particular field?
Probably that one. Other ones probably deal more in part, but the first one you mentioned deals exclusively with the
Yo, Stevie, what's up,
and
dude? Coming through here. 14 months in this house. Wow. What's up, homie? What are you doing, man? Let me give you one of these right here also, dude. What are these guys?
Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary. Hey, thanks, dude.
The forensic
long-ass
pathology
time.
part, as you alluded to.
Okay, and it's got an
If you're
orange.
not following True Crime Jungle, give him a follow. He's going to be, and he's been posting some really, really cool content. Like outside of, it is true crime, but it's also like mixing in with like celebrities and like their lives, but also how they can get in trouble and the wildness that they kind of go through.
It's an orange
really good
cover. It's called
content.
the Orange Journal by experts such as yourself, correct?
That's correct.
That's kind of the nickname for it?
Yes.
And
Actually, I think
On
you'll
that note,
dig
we're
it.
going to go ahead and take our noon recess. Ladies and gentlemen, keep in mind the admonition. We'll see you back at 1:30 this afternoon. Thank you. Step down.
Order to session.
All right, back on the record. All the parties, jurors, alternates, and the witness are present. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We left off, we were talking a little bit
10
about
months.
what an
Shit.
expert in your field.
Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Love that, Kaylin. Yeah, you've been hanging and banging with us for a long time also now. I'm going to give you one of those as well. You know what I'm saying?
Hanging and banging.
Hanging and banging, brother.
Relies upon as far as advancement in education or knowledge in the field of forensic pathology. Remember, we were talking about that, and we talked about the
Best people in this-
textbook that I showed you.
in this
and
community.
You mentioned that you were familiar with it, that you actually used it in this case. And let me ask you this question. You mentioned also that as far as medical journals, that there were basically 2 in the field of forensic pathology that were prominent, and one of them we talked about, the American Journal
8
of
months.
Forensic Pathology
Damn.
and Medicine
Yeah.
is one. The Orange Journal, correct?
Almost got
What
a
was the
buzzed
other one
baby
that we didn't quite
coming to
get to
term
yet?
there.
I think
That's
that was called
awesome.
the Journal of
Loving that. Hell yeah. I'm going to give you a little love too for it, baby.
Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Forensic Sciences.
Yeah, let me get you
Okay,
to
and that's
We've got some
published
cool
through
stuff.
the American Academy of Forensic Sciences?
That's correct.
And are you a member of that academy?
No, I'm not.
Okay, and but you subscribe to the journal, in other words, because it publishes in a wide area of forensic sciences, including forensic medicine and pathology. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so even though it doesn't exclusively deal with your field, in part that journal does. Is that true?
Yes.
Now, is there an
Thumbnails are
organization
insane.
that you're familiar with known as the National Association of Medical Examiners?
Yes.
It goes by the acronym of NAME.
Yes.
Okay, and do you involve yourself in reading any of their published works or studies and things of that nature?
Yes.
Okay. Do you ever go to their conferences, the name conferences?
Some of them I have.
Okay. So in addition to reading the subject areas and doing research, basically in the particular field you belong to, you go to some meetings, scientific meetings in your field. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. Other than the name conferences, what conferences, just give the jury a general example how you keep up. Now, what do you do to do that on a yearly basis?
Mainly through reading the textbooks, for instance, from Dr. Spitz, Dr. DeMile's textbooks I rely heavily on. There's two, actually there's three now that he's written.
You do?
Also the journals, as Mr. Plord has alluded to, I've read
those are
those.
crazy.
Going to the meetings is certainly helpful. You get to see how other medical examiners handle certain cases, so it's kind of interesting. And pretty much that's the extent of it.
Okay, that kind of keeps you abreast of information in your field that would be pertinent to cases like this. Is that true?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned Dr. DeMaio. He's a forensic pathologist that sort of has a subspecialty in the field of forensic pathology where he has done a lot of research and published on the aspect of gunshot wounds. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that particular area, that subspecialty of gunshot wound deaths, is a specialty within forensic pathology. Is that true?
Yes.
Now, when Mr. Jackson was talking to you a little bit on direct examination, you said that you weren't really an expert in gunshot wounds or gunshot residue or something. I didn't quite get that. Tell me what you said.
Sure, I'll correct that. I'm not an expert on gunshot, the actual handguns, any of the ammunition of what are called firearms, whether it be a small handgun, rifles, shotguns. What I am an expert on are the wound defects that those firearms can cause that pertain to the body. Outside the body, I'm not. And that would include the ballistics also, I'm not an expert on.
Okay. Now, I have this book by Dr. Vincent DeMaio, and it's called Gunshot Wounds. That's one of the books that you talked about, correct?
Yes.
And you mentioned that he's published a number of other books, but primarily in the specialty of gunshot wounds. Is that correct?
Yes.
And he's recognized as the leading or preeminent authority on gunshot wounds in the United States, if not the world. Is that true?
Yes.
And you've actually consulted his reference works, his books, in this case. Is that true?
That's correct.
Why was it necessary for you to do that, Dr. Pena? In other words, to look at specialty books and journals regarding gunshot wounds as it relates to this case? In other words, why didn't you know that maybe before or had experience
Kaylin, thanks for that share. Appreciate that. Hell yeah.
with that before?
Well, this case is very unique because intraoral homicide gunshot wounds are very rare.
Yeah, saw that.
And
Appreciate that.
wanted
I was literally
to,
just looking on there.
I've always been trained as a clinician from, I'm from Minnesota, not from Minnesota, but I train in Minnesota.
Pete.
They're very big on what else can it be. That's your what called differential diagnosis. You may home in on an area like intraoral gunshot wound, just for our sake, what we're discussing today. And we know it's a homicide, accident, or suicide, let's say. So I, in my own mind, I had to formulate, why can't it be the other two? Why is it a homicide? So I have to kind of rule things out in pieces. So what I did, I take, for instance, Dr. Spitz's book, and I go right to the chapter on homicides, suicides, and he has a nice one there categorized together where he states in there too about circumstances. You need to put it all together. And as a pathologist, you have to then make a decision because we're the ones ultimately that'll check that box, whether it's a homicide, et cetera. And the same with Dr. DeMaio, he would agree that you have to put into the totality of evidence what's presented to you, and including the circumstances, and come to an opinion. So you have to put in all these different information. So I grabbed each of their books, Dr. Spitz's book, Dr. DeMaio's book. Then I went to the literature because it was just, again, intraoral gunshot wounds to the mouth are very rare. And those are the things that I relied on.
Okay. When you say that they're rare for homicides, what do you mean by that?
They're just that. They don't occur that often. In my own experience, I've only had one other that I can recall out of the 3,000 or so.
Okay. Let me ask you this question. You mentioned differential diagnosis. Why don't you explain that term for the members of the jury?
Oh, sure. Let's say, for instance, a real simple one. Someone comes in with a complaint of chest pain. Clinicians are familiar with this. You'll go through and figure out what else could it be besides chest pain if they don't respond to the nitroglycerin, which is what a lot of ER doctors will give a patient that comes in, hook them up to an EKG monitor, start running tests right away. Well, if they rule out that quickly enough, then they might think of maybe acid reflux as another possibility of causing the chest pain. or it might be what's called an aortic dissection, something, a big branch coming off the heart called the aorta that might be tearing apart because the patient has high blood pressure.
Hey, have
So
a great
other things you need to
day.
be thinking
Pete, thank you so
about
much. Really appreciate
other than
that.
just homing in on just a heart attack. So that list gets long, by the way. Or they could have problems with their cartilage in their ribs on the chest that can mimic a heart attack. It scares patients to death, literally. But they'll rely on a bunch of other factors. So that's what's called differential, or ruling out other things.
Okay, and along with that, somebody can go to one doctor and get a second opinion and actually get two different opinions based upon the same symptoms, essentially. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and as a forensic pathologist, even though you're
God,
not dealing with
doctors freak
live
me out,
individuals,
man.
the same thing essentially can occur. Is that also true?
A whole lot of
Yes.
guessing going on.
Now, we talked a bit about the concept of interoral gunshot wounds being rather rare for homicides. You mentioned you had one in your career. And when was that in your career, as far as years ago?
That was in the late 1990s.
Okay, so out of the 3,300, you only had one that you called as actually a homicide. Is that correct?
Besides this one, that's correct.
Okay, and you've had, though, a number of other interoral gunshot wound deaths that you did not classify as homicides. Is that true?
Correct.
Okay, those were all classified as self-inflicted wounds. Is that true?
Yes.
And what is the definition of a self-inflicted wound, if you could explain that to the jury?
Generally, that's the more of a, gets into intent, so the person knows their actions, that by pulling the trigger or maybe even overdosing, whatever it may be, by that action, they know they're going to die, and that's generally intent or going to be self-inflicted.
Okay. So does self-inflicted necessarily imply that it's intentional, or could it be, don't you classify it even in your office as, accidental sometimes, but self-inflicted, things of that nature?
That depends on the circumstances of what was going on prior.
Okay, and so we'll get to that in a little bit more detail, but I wanted to kind of ask you some additional foundational questions. You talked about a lot of other people that you rely upon to help you do your job as a forensic pathologist. And I want to talk about that for a little bit. You mentioned, first of all, a number of people that actually went with you to the death scene, and they did certain things, and they did things that were different than what you did. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, first of all, we have Barbara Nelson. You mentioned her, and what is her job classification and the role that she played in going to this death scene?
Well, her title is an investigator coroner. She's not a physician, but by her previous training, she is an RN. Which her goal is, or job is, in a case like this, she actually took me to the death scene and drove me there. But her main job is to handle the body, period, and home in strictly on the body, make sure everything's contained. For example, with Ms. Clarkson, that things aren't removed improperly, but that's at the death scene, which didn't happen, of course, in this case. But she made sure all that was in control, and that's mainly her role. And then, of course, to get the circumstances, what happened. So she gets the same story that I'm going to hear from the detective of what initially happened. So she's getting a story besides doing a cursory body exam, and that's mainly her function.
Okay, we'll get back to her maybe in a little bit more detail, but essentially she's an investigator who works for the coroner's office, the office that you're employed by. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the coroner's office, is it what kind of an entity is it? Is it a separate entity than, let's say, the district attorney's office or the sheriff's department, et cetera?
Yes, it is.
It functions as an independent agency?
The LA County Coroner's Office has the Medical Examiner's Office Division, which is where the doctors are in the science part, including our toxicologists and coroner criminalists. And then the other side is the investigator, I'm sorry, that's the coroner's side, which is our investigators for our coroner investigators.
Okay. Now, Ms. Nelson, she doesn't really do what you do as far as cause and manner of death. She's not determining that, is she?
No.
Okay. Basically, she goes there to investigate to help you do that. Is that true?
Yes.
And one area that she involves herself in as far as the circumstances is she tries to gather information to assist you as to what might be the cause of death. For example, if there's a gun involved, she might get some information to you regarding the type of gun. Is that true?
Yes.
And, the type of bullets in the gun, et cetera. Is that true?
Yes.
And then would she also be in charge of making sure that evidence is collected from the body at the death scene?
If necessary, she can do some of that. She's been trained to do that. In this case, we had our coroner criminalist / toxicologist, Ms. Lintonmoot, who's part of our division, come out and help with that part.
Okay, so in addition to Ms. Nelson, you had this other person, Ms. Lintonmoot, and she actually collected the evidence. She was what's known as a criminalist, is that correct?
Correct. I'm sorry, a coroner criminalist. That's
Coroner
correct.
criminalist, okay. Why don't you explain to the jury what the difference is between what a coroner criminalist would do versus what Ms. Nelson would do as an investigator, former RN that worked for the coroner's office also. If you could kind of contrast their roles in this particular case.
Sure. Pretty much they're going to work as a team, both together. For instance, Ms. Lintonmoot would collect evidentiary items that she sees on the body. In this case, this night, she finds what she thinks is a hair on Ms. Clarkson's slip. So she made sure to collect that. I witnessed that. She did the GSR gunshot, what's called a gunshot residue test on the hands, one for the left and one for the right on Ms. Clarkson that same night at the death scene. She also did some oral swabs of Ms. Clarkson at the death scene. And she did some other adhesive tape tests on the dress. I'm not sure, again, I'm sorry, I don't recall what that was for. And I believe she collected a fragment, it looked like a tooth that was seen on Ms. Clarkson's over the abdomen area, if I recall correctly. I think that later turned out to be a tooth fragment. Those are things that Ms. Lintonmoot would be looking for, and she's trained for that on the body that deals with the body. In contrast, Ms. Nelson, Barbara Nelson, would be collecting evidence, if necessary, if she was alone, like fingernail clippings, scrapings, hair samples. But in this case, Ms. Lintonmoot went ahead and did everything. So they kind of cross-cover each other. But more importantly, Ms. Lintonmoot's also trained to do what's called a sexual assault kit, which is an additional thing that our investigator coroners, cannot do, Ms. Lintonmoot would do. And that was done in this case.
Okay. Now, sometimes when there's a question about time of death, when a death occurred, they do some things to check on that, or you do some things regarding that also. Is that true?
Yes.
Now, sometimes do they ever get involved in looking at other aspects of the body that might give you a time of death, like collecting animal, or what, I don't know what you call them, insects and things like that?
Yeah, there's, in this case, we found some fly eggs on Ms. Clarkson, I believe in the right ear and also in the right collarbone area on her black slip, which was collected by Ms. Lintonmoot. And sometimes that may or may not be helpful in terms of time of death, but we collected it.
Okay. Basically, that occurred because basically it was a long time before you and your investigators got there. Isn't that true?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. We pretty much, in this case, time of death is not much an issue. Is that true?
That's true.
Okay. So that just was sort of an artifact of time and the delay that it took to get you and your team of people there. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now I want to get back to the idea of your helpers, basically Ms. Nelson and Ms. Lintonmoot, and what their roles are. Part of their duties is to not only do the work that you just described, but to document by way of making records as to what they do. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, so they take notes of what they observe, and you can go back and look at that to remind yourself as to what they did at the particular scene. Is that true?
That's correct.
And like, for example, Ms. Nelson, she could talk to people, she could get information, and she would then write a note about that. And if you needed to refresh your memory, you would go back to remember that if you don't remember it when it happened. Is that true?
Yes.
Did you talk to people, detectives, when you were at the death scene that particular afternoon? Evening?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did they tell you about statements that were made by Mr. Spector, both
Alan
initially and later on that particular day?
Yes.
Okay. When he got to the police station, for example, did they indicate what statements were made and what his, when he was sat down and interviewed regarding this particular event?
I vaguely, but I remember something about the station statement, and also, of course, when I was at the scene.
Okay.
When I was told also, yes.
And as a forensic pathologist, you try to consider all the information that comes to you before you make a conclusion as to cause and manner of death. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so you certain information, I take it, is of value to you, in other words, that you give it some credence, versus other information that you may not give it as much, but you consider it all. Is that true?
Yes,
So it all has some value. The question is how much value, correct?
that's correct.
Okay, and so with reference to the statements of Mr. Spector at various times that morning, that day, you considered those, is that correct?
Yes,
And with reference to information that Ms. Nelson, Barbara Nelson, collected, you considered that also, is that true?
yes,
Now, she helps you when you're doing your work. For example, when you were looking at the body, you made a number of findings. In other words, you tried to determine, for example, rigor mortis, and you documented that, and Ms. Nelson wrote notes about your findings concerning that, correct?
yes,
So she kind of helps you by sort of being a scribe as to what you're saying and what you're doing. Is that true?
yes.
Now, and would the same be of Ms. Lintemoot? In other words, did she show you things that she was observing, and did you take note of what she was observing, or did you let her do her job independently?
I let her do her job independently.
That's sort of a different role that she was playing, isn't that correct?
That is correct.
She dealt with collecting items from the body. Like, for example, in her notes, she says something about maybe a portion of an acrylic nail was possibly collected from her dress, but it turned out that might not have been correct.
I don't exactly remember. I have her notes here, and I best look at them if that's...
Well, we'll get to those later.
Okay.
We're going to go through these sort of methodically here, Dr.
Okay.
Pena, and I wanted to, kind of go through them in order. So we'll get to
We're going to
those.
go as slow as humanly possible so Phil Spector can slowly rot in this chair so he can never actually go to prison. That's our entire plan. That's the entire defense here. I don't know if you guys know that or not. Wait out existence so this rich man cannot actually face consequences for what he has done. That is the entire defense strategy.
Listen,
Jesus,
now, when
fuck.
it comes to gunshots and gunshot wounds, you mentioned that you've dealt with those a number of times before. Is that correct?
Yes.
Give us an idea in your career, and I believe you've mentioned that you've done about 3,300 autopsies. About how many of those were gunshot wound cases, just in general, ballpark? I'm not asking for the exact
Sure.
count.
It'd be about between 800 and 900.
Okay, and those would be self-inflicted, homicides, accidentals, kind of a whole range of modes. Is that correct?
Actually, those are mainly homicides. The other ones that you add on probably make it a little bit higher, but I don't know how much, maybe over 900, let's say.
Okay.
Yeah.
900 plus gunshot wound cases. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you must have learned a lot about guns and how they behave and what forces are involved in gun deaths. Is that true?
To the best of my ability, yes.
Okay, but you're not claiming to be a specialist in this particular area of forensic pathology of gunshots and how guns behave and what dynamics occur with reference to a gun firing. Is that
No.
true? You're not claiming to be an expert in that particular subspecialty, are you?
That's correct.
I wanted to ask you to take a look at an exhibit that I brought here, and it's just a generic picture of a gun. And I want you to take a look at that, and I want to ask you a few questions about that if you don't mind. Do you recognize this particular picture, Dr. Pena?
Yes.
Now, you recognize that because it's in this book, Spitz and Fisher, Medical Legal Investigation of Death. Is that correct?
I believe so. I couldn't remember if it was in that one or DeMiles. I forgot.
Okay, well, I've got the page here, and I'll have you take a look at it. May I approach, Ron?
Yes.
Would it help you refresh your memory?
Sure. No, thank you.
Thank you.
Cycle back around to a fro.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. For the record, 608. Now, this is basically a slow motion or high-speed photography of a gun going off that is used to educate pathologists like you as to the dynamics of a weapon firing. Is that true?
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about that so that we can kind of understand what's involved in a gunshot wound, particularly a gunshot wound where the gun is fired close to a human body. Now, in addition to the bullet that you talked extensively about in your testimony, is there anything else that comes out of the gun other than the bullet that concerns you as a forensic pathologist when you look at the cause of death and the manner of death?
Well, there's a number of things. There could be, of course, the gunpowder
Okay.
itself that's driving the bullet out the muzzle. In this case, where you're seeing it here, Also, there's what's called stippling that we talked about earlier. Those are like unburned or burnt powder burning as it comes out. It's another variable. You can also have, depending on how much the weapon's been used, there's another term sometimes used called lead fouling, F-O-U-L-I-N-G, in which the bullet's going down the barrel there, and sometimes, since the gun's been used a lot, it'll kind of start shredding the bullet apart, and lead fragments will start coming out. Also, that can happen along with the jacket, so it could be torn apart a little bit. And what else? I'm not really an expert on that, but that's just a little general background.
Okay, and I want to talk in generalities to some extent, but the information that you learn about a gun and firing basically is exclusive to forensic pathology. In other words, your interest in it is only because of forensic pathology. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You haven't taken any special education or courses in firearms to learn about how they work, except as it relates to your profession as a pathologist.
That's correct.
So in this case, we've just got an example of a gun firing, and you recognize that as the bullet. Is that correct?
Yes.
And these little sparks and everything, what are they?
You know, I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know what that is.
Okay, that's a little beyond your expertise, I take it. Is
Yes.
that correct? Okay, but obviously if a weapon is fired in close proximity to a human being, these hot sparks, I'll call them sparks, might have some evidentiary significance. Is that true, Dr. Pena?
Yes.
Now, it looks like a cloud that is here. What is that?
I believe that's gunpowder.
Okay. Where does it go?
Well, depending on the distance it is from the skin, that can disperse out into the air. So if you're a couple feet away from a person and that's discharge intended to go to that person, you know, 2.5 feet perhaps further, again, depending on the weapon, depending on the powder, that actual powder that you're seeing there could disperse. However, if it's close enough to the person or to the target, that powder will get distributed on somewhere, perhaps their clothing or on the person's skin itself.
Okay, and you look at that because it might assist you in explaining the cause of death. In other words, how far the gun was away from the person or how close it was, those issues. Is that true?
Yes.
And basically when the bullet is fired within the gun, it creates an explosion essentially in simple terms.
Yes.
And then it moves the projectile out, is that correct?
Yes.
And actually the gases that get created from this explosion, actually some of them can get in front of the bullet. They get out of the barrel before the bullet itself, correct?
Yes.
So these gases are moving very rapidly. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And would you also agree that there's a lot of gas and combustion that occurs, and depending upon the type of ammunition, more or less gets created?
That is a very
And
strange reaction.
Did you investigate this at all as far as the weapon in this particular case by looking at a report by Barbara Nelson as to the type of gun and the ammunition and that type of thing?
Barb Nelson, she only described the type of weapon and the number of rounds in the revolver itself, and that was it, if I recall correctly.
Okay, but you relied upon her report, whatever that is. She has there's actually a form that's filled out called a gunshot residue report or gunshot data report.
Gunshot data report, that's correct.
You've got the name correct. And then now, would it make a difference if a gun was fired near somebody as opposed to being fired inside somebody? In other words, would it make any difference as to how those gases all spread out and dissipate?
Yes.
Okay, and why would that make a difference? If let's say I was from here to you and you were shot, God forbid, or I was very close to you, like I was almost right up to you, what difference would that make as far as this massive gas cloud that gets created when a bullet is fired from a weapon?
The gas cloud in a very confined area, for instance, in the oral cavities we discussed earlier, would stay confined in the oral cavity as much as it would, of course, if the weapon had been placed to the head. It would be driven in. And again, the cranial cavity, like the oral cavity, are very confined areas. And the gases would get literally trapped in there, or they'll get forced force further back. As opposed to Mr. Plur described earlier, if I was being shot from that distance, the cloud would disappear basically, but the bullet may strike me.
Right. Now, would it also make a difference if there was an exit wound? In other words, as far as once the gases got in the body, if there's an exit wound, would that make a difference as to what might happen as a result of a gunshot wound or gun wound?
I don't quite understand your question, I'm sorry.
In other words, in this case, there was no exit wound.
Correct.
Okay, which means that the bullet didn't leave the body, and the gases didn't leave the body through the hole that the bullet created when it left the body, because there was no hole for it to leave from, correct?
Well, that's correct, but actually the gases are going to be dispersed, so that they're going to be dispersed well before that bullet, but say if it did exit, they're not going to follow the bullet completely out. They're going to be trapped with the soft tissue, et cetera, and the bullet will do its thing no matter where it exits. So that's important to hopefully you understand that.
Okay. And for the record, Your Honor, we've been referring to this particular exhibit, and I forgot what order, or the next in order was.
Your next would be double F.
Double F, thank you.
Okay.
Now, if we could have the close-up of this same weapon, and it would be double G, Your Honor?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this is a picture of the same gun firing, only now we're just looking at the person holding the weapon, and again, it's right out of Dr. Spitz's book. Is that correct?
Cool picture.
Yes.
And it's, in fact, it's what you looked at to kind of learn what this was all about. And for the record, it's going to be double G. And you see here that this example of what happens when a gun is fired, as far as this cloud of gas, it doesn't just go forward and involve the body or the person that is the object of the gun firing. It actually deals with the person that might be holding the weapon. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you know a little bit about that as a forensic pathologist, because who's holding the weapon is a particular concern. Is that true?
Hanging and banging, baby.
And you have to know about the differences between a revolver and a automatic weapon when it comes to these gases and what happens and where the evidence goes and so forth. Is that also true?
Yes.
So looking at Exhibit G here, you see that what it shows is these gases. Need to back that up. There we go. Exhibit GG, excuse me. And the person firing the gun can get gases in and around their hand. Is that true?
Yes.
And on their clothing, is that correct?
In general, yes.
Okay. And the area where the revolver holds the bullets is known as what, Dr. Pena?
A barrel?
That's the part that the bullet goes down, is the barrel. But the here, do we call that the cylinder?
Or chamber, here, yeah, something like that.
The cylinder holds bullets, and it revolves, and then one bullet can be fired, and then it can be moved in one after another, basically.
Correct.
Okay, so, and then this back part here, that would be the trigger?
Yes.
Now, the cylinder and the trigger area are important to...
I'm sorry, for the record, was counsel referring to the hammer?
Excuse me, the hammer, I'm sorry, I was looking at the trigger and pointing at the hammer that fires the bullet?
Yes.
Okay, and the area there, gases escape from those areas also, is that correct?
Yes.
And basically, do they have a particular name associated with them as far as where those gases escape?
I don't know that.
Have you ever heard the term cylinder gap?
Yes, I have.
Okay, what's your understanding of that term, Dr. Pena?
Well, this appears to be outside the foundation of
Well, he indicated he's not an expert on guns, but he may have some knowledge as it relates to how gases and other things or sooting might end up on someone's body, so I'll allow an inquiry into that area. You may proceed.
Okay, cylinder gap, and what's your understanding of how that is a import to the type of work that you do?
Basically, because I think of it real simple as a revolver, and when it's discharged, a lot of the gases can escape through the, you know how it's six-chambered or rounded with the bullets in there, a lot of the gases can escape through other areas of that. I'm calling it a chamber around that revolver, other than an automatic where everything's going to be confined and out straight, if I understand correctly. And then the gases can come out. So you get, in other words, a gap. So the best example I can give you, let's say that I'm holding a revolver here with my hand, and I fire here, if someone's standing here, they could actually get some of the gas or even some of the stippling, if you want to call it, burnt or unburnt powder, come onto them or their clothing. As I'm standing here and I fire, that could go over this way. And that's generally how I understand a cylinder gap.
Okay, and when you said clothing, you were pointing to your sleeve. In other words, somebody holding a gun, in addition to their hand having this trace of evidence, you might find some on their sleeve of they're wearing a coat like I am, or they're wearing a shirt like I am. You might want to look at the part closest to where the gun is. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the same would be true on the opposite hand. You could look at that and see if there's any residue there, these particles. Is that true?
That's correct.
And you don't do that yourself. You rely on criminalists to do that, and then you rely on their conclusions. Is that true?
Yes.
And is that what you did in this case?
Yes.
And who was the criminalist regarding the gunshot residue that you relied upon, or criminalists if there were more than one?
Well, that'd be the LA Sheriff's Crime Lab. It's like a team effort. So I know Mr. Jim Carroll was involved. Of course, Dr. Lynn Harrell, and I think perhaps one other individual whose name I don't recall.
Okay, and you relied on their work and their conclusions to help assist you in coming to the opinions that you've given today before this jury?
Some of it, yes.
Okay. Did you consider all of it and weigh it based upon, what degree you felt it was either important or not important?
Yes.
But you considered all of that information. Is that true?
Yes, I did.
The totality of the circumstances, so to speak.
Yes.
Now, I want to get back to sort of how it all begins with Ms. Nelson and her investigative reports, and I want to put on that gunshot residue data sheet that we talked about. That's a document that is in your filing system. And do you recognize this? And we'll mark this next in order, Your Honor, which would be HH.
Yes.
I've got to get a copy of that to make sure that you recognize what's been now marked as HH, Dr. Pena?
Yes.
First of all, at the bottom, if we could highlight that bottom portion as far as the date and authentication of what this item is, I'd like to do that.
It's right there, baby. Make
You
sure you hit that
recognize that as
thing.
Ms. Nelson's signature, there being a ID number of herself and a date of 2303.
Yes.
And what is would that be associated with this particular case? In other words, the case of decedent Lana Clarkson?
Yes. Yes, it is.
And looking at the case number that Mr. Jackson talked about in the top right-hand corner, if we could highlight that for a moment. The case number 2003-00937 would be the case number that's unique to Lana Clarkson and so forth. Is that correct?
Yes.
And essentially, what Ms. Nelson does is gather information for you because you want all the information so that you can consider it as to what there is to do or not do in this case. Is that true?
Yes.
And, for example, male, female, that was pretty clear. Whether she was right-handed or
Use the bathroom,
left-handed
guys.
in
I'll be
this
right
case,
back.
that was unknown. Is that also correct?
At that time, that's
Okay.
correct.
got about
And later on, you
40
learned
minutes,
what as
something
far
like
as
that.
her being left-handed or right-handed?
Ms. Clarkson is right-handed.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone, for being
Well, just
here.
like Mr.
Appreciate it.
Spector, you learned that he was right-handed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
And-
actually, there's no foundation for that. It's a hearsay. Thank you.
Sustained,
Motion to
stricken, the
strike.
jury is admonished to disregard it.
How did you learn that Ms. Clarkson was right-handed?
Through medical reports from a neurologist.
Okay. And did you? Well, we'll get to the other foundation later. Now, this particular document that we'll call a gunshot residue data sheet basically was filled out by Miss Barbara Nelson after she went to the scene. In other words, once you guys got home from your work at the death scene. Is that true?
Yes.
And basically, she put on this particular data sheet that this was a homicide as opposed to it being an accident, suicide, questionable accident homicide, questionable accident suicide, questionable suicide homicide, investigator request rush, whatever that means. In other words, she categorized that after she conferred with you and made certain calls in this case. Is that true?
Yes.
And you assisted her in formulating the investigative information that she worked on in this case. Is that true, Doctor?
Actually not. That's wrote independently from her division, and her supervisor will sign the report and agree or disagree and make corrections as necessary.
Okay. Do you remember if her supervisor actually went to the scene or not?
She did not.
When she took notes, though, she took notes at the scene itself. She didn't wait to write those later, like this document is created. Is that true?
That's true.
Just to get the sequence of events as far as her investigative work, she goes to the scene, takes her notes, and then when she gets back, she'll fill out this form for your help. Is that true?
Yes.
So if we could look down, and highlight some of the other areas, the next block, she basically gets information that she learns as far as the person, who they were, the number of shots fired, who helped collect the evidence, the GSR, that type of information. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when if we can go to the next level of this particular document, it tells you the type of weapon that's involved. Is that correct?
Yes.
The type of ammunition, the brand that's, in this case, Spear something, and it's a .38 caliber gun?
Yes.
Okay, and you learned that during the course of your work that this was a .38 caliber short-barreled weapon. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, and then it tells you the type of bullet that you might be looking for at the autopsy. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you actually developed and learned this information before you did the post-mortem examination. Is that true?
But I don't recall seeing this in the file at the time, but usually it is there. You're probably right.
Okay, but if you didn't get it in writing, you would have gotten a verbal rendition of it so that you would be better prepared to do the medical evaluation that you did at the autopsy. Is that true?
That's true.
Okay, and it tells you the number of bullets in the gun and so forth, okay? Is that, we've kind of gone over that fairly thoroughly? Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now if we could have Ms. Nelson's investigative document up there, which I believe is 2456, and have that marked II.
Excuse me, I have no objection to counsel cross-examining the witness on this document. I don't know that it needs to be published at this point to the jurors. It appears to be hearsay.
It's hearsay that was relied upon by this witness.
And I have no objection to counsel cross-examining the witness on it. It doesn't need to be published to the jurors at this point.
Take it off the screen, please.
Thank you. Okay, do you have that document II before you, Dr. Pena?
Oh, yes. Just give me a second.
All right.
Do you want that marked as double I?
Yes, I do.
All right.
I'll have it marked.
Counsel, could you give me the date on that?
Yeah, it's 2303, which is the date you and Ms. Nelson went to the scene. I actually have the exhibit itself here.
Okay, so to compare. Thank you.
Mark
sure I made it
II. And why don't you just use the exhibit, and I've got a second copy of it.
Okay.
Do you recognize that being Ms. Nelson's investigative note that she created when she went to the scene that's part of your file record in this case, Dr. Pena?
Actually, Mr. Port, this is my writing. I'm sorry. This is I did this at the scene. I made a couple of notes, and this is one of them.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is my notes.
Let me make sure I have the right one marked, because I don't recognize your handwriting versus hers.
That's okay.
Okay,
yeah.
So could we, since it's his note, Your Honor, can I have it published?
Is there any objection at this point, Mr. Jackson?
It's still hearsay.
Okay.
Pardon?
The objection is still, the bottom line is the fact that he prepared it, it may contain admissible matters, it may contain inadmissible matters. When you put it in front of the jury, the whole document, they may be viewing things that they're otherwise not permitted to see.
Okay, I'll lay the foundation now.
All right.
Dr. Pena, your job with the coroner's office as a forensic pathologist, you have certain duties that you're required to perform. Is that true?
Yes.
If you were assigned this case and you were asked to go to the death scene, you don't really have a choice. You go to do that because that's part of your job, correct?
Yes.
And then also part of your job, just like Ms. Nelson, you're required to document what you do once you get to the death scene. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you're required to write down notes of what you see so that you could then later on put them in the file and rely upon them when you end up testifying, like in a case like this. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you have a duty and an obligation to do your note-taking correctly. Is that correct?
Yes.
In other words, you don't put things that you guess happened or you think may have happened. You put what you see or don't see. Is that true?
Yes.
And sometimes you note things affirmatively, like if you see something, you'll note that in your scene note investigation taking, and things that you don't see, the absence of a particular item. Is that true?
Yes.
And this note that you create when you go to the scene becomes a part of the official file of the Los Angeles Coroner's Office. Is that correct?
Yes, it does.
It becomes a record in the coroner's file. Is that true?
Yes.
And have you had a chance to look at this to refresh your recollection as to what you did at the scene before you testified in this case?
Yes.
Okay. And did you also look at it to determine whether it was fair and accurate as to what you saw and what you observed when you went to the death scene for Lana Clarkson on the 3rd of February of 2003?
Yes.
And is this note fair and accurate as far as what you observed and what you took down as far as your observations?
Except for one point at the very end.
Okay. And what point is that, Dr. Pena?
It's my mistake. Time arrived back at the office. In other words, once I'm done at the death scene, I came back to the office, and I know at the time I arrived back at the coroner's office, I put down 1850 hours, which is, what time is that in the regular time? Sorry.
In real time, I think it has something to do with...
What is it?
6:50 p.m. Yeah, 6:50.
Thank you.
In the
6:50. So I'm an hour off. I got back at 1950, actually. That's what in my official report in the autopsy.
Okay.
So that would be...
Grab Spaz, what's up?
7:50?
Welcome in here.
Okay, thanks.
Now, you got there at 5:15 p.m., is that true?
Yes.
And you went with Miss Nelson and Miss Lintamood, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and essentially, you noted what you observed as far as Miss Clarkson, she was basically in a chair, positioned in a chair, is that correct?
Yes.
Hey, be safe.
Now, you also indicated that there was a gunshot wound to the head that you documented in your note when you went to the scene. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this note was written actually at the scene or as you were doing the things that you were doing that particular date on February 3rd of 2003. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when you got, and the only mistake you made is when you got to the office, you put down the wrong time. Is that correct?
Correct.
But that's the last thing you did on this particular note is when you got back to the office. That sort of concluded this one-page note that you took at this particular scene. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you would, you obviously put the address where you went, the times that you left the office and arrived at the scene, et cetera. Is that true?
Yes.
So what was your purpose in doing this particular note, Dr. Pena?
Just to be conscientious of where I'm going, the time where I'm at, and also the time I enter the home and examine Ms. Clarkson, because the sheriff has to clear the crime scene before we're ever allowed in there, so we don't mess up the crime scene. So that happens on other cases I've gone to the death scene, so I have to be very careful. But I note that time to cover myself, to let people know that there could be an hour or two gap by the time I leave the office before I examine the body. Some people will ask me that, and that's why.
Okay, and so you do that so that you know the sequence of events, and you basically document what you saw, what you observe, and then eventually you get back to the medical examiner's office and you do the autopsy. Is that true?
Yes.
And those are different documents that get created from there. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. I would like to publish this to the jury and then ask some follow-up questions. At this point, I believe the foundation's been laid.
Hearsay.
Well, it seems to be an official, if it's an official record, that it would not be hearsay, and that would be the exception. The question is, what's the official record? Is it your report or is it your notes?
That's a good question.
Jim D, welcome in here.
That's why I asked it.
Well,
I don't know how many buttons he's got open
so
today.
much going on. I'm just being honest with you. I took notes as Mr. Plort, as you know.
It's like at least 3 buttons open there. Death Stare. Ghoul Stare by Phil Spector. Everybody coming through, really appreciate it. See a lot of new folks roll in. Hit the old like ski if you have not. Give it a share on the old X machine. Thanks a lot, guys.
Oh, those are good questions, and I have a
Will
couple
is
of
still in
pages 'cause
play.
Things get
I
rewritten.
think we have 2 names on the
What's
new
on
will.
this page here may not be on the next page, which may not be in my final autopsy report, because there is an autopsy report which has the death scene described, but I leave certain things out. It's called editing, and some things, again, because we're all human, I make mistakes. I left out for some things, and that's okay, but that's why these 42s are important. They're note forms that we use. They don't become part of the official autopsy report. You got to understand that. But they're part
Need a
of the
new
autopsy
feel.
coroner file, as Mr. Plord said. That is correct. But sometimes you do have to refer to them because they can help you, again, picture everything back together, and I did in this case. That's correct.
Are you required to keep those as part of, does the coroner require you to keep those as part of your job, to take notes on that form?
Yes.
Okay, and are they maintained as part of the official file?
Yes, they are.
When you take them, do you have a duty to be accurate at the time they're taken?
Well, to the best of your ability, that's correct.
Of course that.
Yeah.
Okay, they are part of the official record, and therefore,
Aye.
and they may be published.
So, no, that's not aye. There we go. Okay, now if you look at this exhibit, and I believe that on the screen is basically an enlargement of what you have right before you that's marked aye. Dr. Pena, is this the note that we've been talking about? And it has a date, if we look at the top, it looks like of 2303. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the times that we talked about, leave the office at 5:15 and get there at 5:35. And then if you look a little higher up on the right-hand corner, it's got the case number and so forth. Is that true?
Yes.
And it's got the number 42 associated with it. Is that also correct?
Yes.
And that's the official form. That's the name of this form, form number 42.
Correct.
Called a worksheet where notes are required. And you, as part of the staff at the coroner's office, are required to actually use this form in conjunction with your work in this case. Is that true?
Yes.
And other investigators also use this form, but they do it and they record what they do based upon their job responsibilities. Is that correct?
Basically, yes.
Okay. So once we go through this form, and I apologize for not understanding how to read your handwriting. You have a doctor's handwriting, Dr. Pena, and I appreciate that, but I wanted to focus your attention on the issue of
Kelly Hill in
cause
the
and manner
house.
of
What's
death.
up?
This is the opinion that you've testified to here on this particular case today, and you also addressed that issue on that particular date. Is that true?
Yes.
And that was based upon your observation of the body before you got back to the medical examiner's office that night. Is that true?
That's correct.
And all of this handwriting, basically the examination of the body, the position it was in, are things that you actually observed. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then basically you came to a conclusion that the cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head, and you didn't get real specific as to that, but it says GSW head. Am I correct in reading that?
That's correct.
Okay, and then there's something right behind that at 2150. I'm not sure what that means, but what's the words right after gunshot wound to
That's
head?
per fluoroscopy. That's our X-ray machine.
Fluoroscopy?
Okay, and you added that later. Is that true?
Easy for you to say.
Yes.
And so you must have gone back and modified this document at later that night. Is that correct? Once the body was transported to the medical examiner's office?
That's correct.
And then you also...
Two into the new
manner of
will,
death is
Caleb.
Homicide, is that correct?
We had a spin early this
Okay, and that
morning.
was basically right away, essentially. Is that true?
Got a wild side of what a shirt this
Okay,
morning.
and so nothing's changed between the 3rd of February of 2003 and today, basically. You still have the same manner of death. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is it also true that you...
Shake.
When you were at
Shake,
the scene,
shake,
you
shake.
weren't actually doing anything all the time. Is that correct?
I'm
In
sorry?
other words, you weren't actually looking at the body. In other words, the focus of your attention all the time that you were there. Is that correct?
Most of the time I was focused on the body.
Okay, but you mentioned that you were talking to detectives and getting information. You mentioned you heard about statements made, for example, by Mr. Spector at the scene as well as later on at the police station. So you must have been chatting with some people at some point in time. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is it typical for you to get kind of a briefing when you get there to kind of get an overall perspective as to what might be going on at this particular scene?
That's correct, and that's prior to entry to that home in this
Okay.
case.
Tell the jury what you did to get that perspective, and I don't want a rendition of all the facts you were told or the circumstances you were told, but what's the process like, if you could explain that to the members of the jury?
Sure. Miss Investigator Barbara Nelson and I arrived at this home. We got out of the car and approached by, it was Detective, I'll never forget, Lilienfeld from the LA Sheriff's Department. And he came up and briefed us on the story and what happened. I won't go into any more details you heard earlier. And what was going on from their perspective, and then we had to stand by and wait for about another hour almost, it seemed. And he filled me in on basically the circumstances known at that time. And that's what I received at that moment.
Okay. And you went and then did your evaluation, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then did you meet with the detectives again to share information with them or anything such as that?
Well, inside the residence, because I was able to palpate as she was still in the chair slouched there, I was able to feel the back of her head that she had a protrusion.
Uh-oh, sound getting weird. Let me fix that for y'all real quick. Fajita's popping through.
Fracture at the back of her skull coming outward.
Thanks, guys.
And I
Appreciate
knew right
that.
away is the gunshot wound of the head somewhere. And I surmised that probably because I couldn't see any other hole or entry around
What's
the
this
face,
guy's name?
the skull.
You guys remember
anywhere.
this guy's actual
I thought it was
name?
in the mouth. And at that time, and that's all I could surmise. So I don't indicate that here, but I remember that clearly.
Okay, now when you
the
say it
defense
was in the
attorney,
mouth,
the
you
penis
actually
dude.
thought on that date that it was not an intraoral gunshot wound. You thought it was an extraoral, or the gun was fired from outside the body into the mouth. Is that true?
I was hoping for that.
Okay, because that makes it a pretty easy call for you as far as being a homicide, because it rules out self-inflicted. Is that correct?
Yes.
In fact, self-inflicted wounds are very rarely, or usually, self-inflicted wounds are intraoral. Is that the case?
No.
Intraoral wounds, in other words, where the gun's in the mouth, are usually self-inflicted. Did I state that correctly?
Okay, intraoral gunshot wounds are commonly seen in the mouth. If someone's going to commit suicide to the head, most common site's the right temple.
Well, let's talk about that. Are there studies that you rely upon to come to that opinion that you just gave?
There's a number of studies. One is just personal observation from our own office, the LA County Coroner's Office, because we see these every year. We see a lot of them.
Okay.
Also, textbooks that will give some types of data. And I know Dr. DeMille has had a paper out. I know Kentucky's put a paper out. California, another area, did some studies. And another gentleman from San Diego did a study also. And that's how I've kind of concluded what I just told you.
Okay, and when you say studies, you really mean some research that is done, that is published, so that other pathologists like yourself can learn about the subject. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so would it be true that the most common method of suicide or self-inflicted wounds that people die from are gunshots? Would that be a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay, and would it also be true that the most common site is the temple of the head? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the second most common
Cannot
site
find
is
this
the
dude's
intraoral,
name.
inside the mouth. Is that correct?
Depending on the sex of the person.
Okay, and so they've actually studied not only where, but whether there's a difference between male and female?
Yes.
Okay, do males
Not the doctor. I'm trying to get the defense attorney's name. I can't remember his name.
to shoot
The
themselves
penis.
in the mouth, inside the mouth, more often than females for some reason?
Yes.
Okay, and what's the difference between the two, if you happen to know from the studies, if you could give us a
I
ballpark?
could give you just a ballpark. Women in general will tend to
He has so many.
do not like to shoot themselves in the head. More often than not, they'll shoot
Like
themselves. If they're going to
representatives.
use a firearm, it'll be in the chest or abdomen, more likely the chest. And that holds true. I'd have to look at our office. Again, we don't have anything published out at this point. But as far as using the head, again, women would prefer much more, if they're going to use the head, the temple rather than inside the mouth.
Do you know how it really breaks down, what the studies show in that regard?
The studies, I'm trying to think, would be like 50% to say, I can't speak for both sexes, but I'm just trying to give you some broad ideas. 50% would prefer the temple overall. Oral would be around 14%, so it drops dramatically.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
Oh, and then as far as the chest and abdomen, women would go combined would be like 23%. Men would be a lot lower, maybe like 15%. And that's actually a study by Dr. DeMaio, because I have his paper on that. But I read that way before this case even happened. Anyway, that just gives you an idea of a breakdown.
Okay, you mentioned that your office has collected information, and I take it you're relying
Now,
to some
Rosam's
extent on
the
that information also.
gray-haired
Well, we haven't
prick.
collected any. It's just personal observations, and we have yearly statistics, but we don't break it down. But just by observing and talking to other colleagues that I work
I have
with,
to wait till Judge Dahart says it
it
again.
breaks down interesting
Right, go crazy.
enough, so I can learn.
Okay, and you mentioned that your office hasn't published anything on it. When you do a publication, do you have to sort of document the reliability of the data before you can publish it?
Absolutely.
In other words, that the data really shows what you're proposing it shows?
Yes.
And which means it has to be scientifically reliable, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, have you ever published anything in this particular area?
Not in this area, no.
Okay, have you published anything in any area of forensic pathology relating to gunshot wound deaths?
Not to gunshot wounds, no.
How about anything related to self-inflicted wounds, whether they be suicidal, intentional, or self-inflicted, accidental, or any of the other categories?
No publications to that.
Okay, so that's not an area that you've concentrated on as far as your profession, is that true?
That's correct.
What areas have you published on
the
that you
lady
have taken a
Linda
particular
Bond.
interest in as an expert in the field of forensic pathology?
I like the heart. It's always been one of my favorite areas, and I have a recent publication in cardiovascular pathology on an unusual case of a young gentleman. I won't go into details, of course.
Oh, the one doing it, Dizzy, the one that's up there now, that's questioning.
But that just gives you an idea what I work on.
This
I
dude.
also give lectures up at the USC Medical Center, the cardiology department, on
Wait till they
forensic
show 'em
pathology,
again.
but that's teaching to help them
I'm over here
become
like-
better cardiologists.
I mean, digging through old
that's some of my
2007
functions.
articles. and-
Okay. Now, with reference to your work as a forensic pathologist, I want to kind of move to another subject area, Dr. Pena, and I want to talk about what comes out of the body when a
Yeah,
person
this dude. What is this dude's name?
is shot. Would one fluid that comes out or material that comes out be blood?
Yes.
Okay, and does it have a name? Do you refer to that as something in the field of forensic pathology and medicine?
Oh, I think
when
that
you're
is
dealing
him.
with it
There you go. Yeah, there we go. Nice. Thank you.
as an evidentiary item in coming to the conclusions that you do.
Karen
in
Dusty
this
for the
type of
win
work?
on that one.
I've heard
Nice.
different terms like blood spatter or blowback. When it comes back onto the shooter's hand or onto the shooter or whoever is
Plard.
nearby. I believe those are the terms that have been used.
Okay, so blowback, blood spatter, those are the two terms that you're familiar with, is that correct?
Yes.
And have there been studies in that subject area similar to the
Christopher
studies that
Plard.
deal with where people tend to shoot themselves?
Yes.
And is Dr. DeMaio, is he another one that studies that also, since he deals with guns?
I'm sorry. Yes, he does. He references in his book a gentleman, Betz, B-E-T-Z, these are German, I believe, pathologists. And that paper, I think, is in early 90s or something. I can't remember. But they wrote a paper on that, and he refers to it in his book.
Okay, so he helps educate pathologists like you on this subject area. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, and you rely upon his books and his publications to come to the opinions that you're giving in this particular case. Is that true?
Yes, and one other thing just to point out, while doing that, I've done it in the past because I like research, is I'll go and look at the references that are given in the book on some of them and just check the validity to make sure that they're not being misinterpreted. So I do that sometimes and to help myself learn.
How did Dr. DeMaio do as far as the references? They were legitimate as far as?
Oh, they're good, yeah.
I'm sure he appreciates that.
Where is he?
He's right in here.
Oh.
There he is. Okay. Anyway, Dr. Pena, you would consider the books that he's written and the references that he referred to as being authoritative on the issue of gunshot wounds as it relates to blood spatter. Is that true, Dr. Pena?
Yes.
And
Yeah, that's true, Brooklyn. We haven't heard really from Cutler since. I know that he ends up quitting, probably because he's no longer needed. I mean, after you kind of show your ass in front of the judge like that, I mean, that's not good, and it looks terrible in front of the jury. I'd have no clue what would your strategy even be acting like that in front of a jury. Like, you're coming off as an absolute prick to everybody.
How long, ever since you were a forensic pathologist, when you were not experienced having done 3,300 cases, but you've only done a couple of cases, he was the authority at that time when you were a new person doing this, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so he's been in the field for many years, many decades, is that correct?
Yes.
Recognized by all of the 400 forensic pathologists in the United States as well as in the world, is that correct?
I don't think there's a date on this
His book
day.
is published in many different languages throughout the world, is that also correct?
Objection, this calls for speculation.
Sustained.
So we've talked about blood spatter, and
That makes sense.
you also use the term blowback, and there's a difference between those two terms. Is that correct, Dr. Pena?
Yeah, don't ask me because I don't know the difference. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, if somebody gets shot and the bullet goes through, there might be blood spatter that gets created. Is that correct?
Yes.
Foundation.
Are you able to testify to that based upon your expertise?
No, I can't.
The objection sustained, the answer is
Okay.
stricken.
When the word blowback implies something coming back as opposed to going forward, is that true?
Objection, foundation.
Again, are you able to answer this based upon your personal knowledge and expertise?
No.
All right, the objection sustained.
Is there a difference? Well, who is the person that you rely upon, if any, other than the publications and the documents that you referred to as far as the references, that you rely upon to interpret issues of blood spatter? Let's talk about that subject area first.
Objection, assumes facts not evidence.
Sustained to the way the question's phrased. You may rephrase it.
In this particular case, Dr.
Hell
Pena,
yeah.
did you consult with
Can't beat
anybody
that.
or talk to anybody
That should last a
relating
minute.
to
I don't know how many cups you'd be
the
drinking
issue
a day,
of cause
but-
and manner of death as to the issue of blood spatter?
No.
Okay, so you didn't, for example, talk to Dr. Lynn Harold at the Sheriff's Laboratory and ask questions about that, or did she give you any information about that?
No.
Okay. In your note, well, let me ask you, when you were at the scene, did you make any notes regarding blood spatter on the body of Lana Clarkson?
Not at that time, no.
Got your email, Wildside. Yes, another Willgate. You come out in the winning side of this Willgate. And also, even behind that, Wildside came through the old Cash App and gave me $5. And she says, please put Tracy K on the wheel. Tracy K getting on the wheel thanks to Wildside. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to put her right here. Boom. Get Tracy K a shirt. That's what we're going to try to do here. And you are now officially on that son of a bitch. Boom, 3 names on the new wheel. Thank you so much, Wildside. I got your information. You will have another shirt. The hanging and banging one, I think is what she said.
Okay. Did you make notes
Hanging and banging
about
one
what
was
you
cool,
saw at
too.
the scene at a later time that weren't in your notes, these notes that are set forth at Exhibit II? Because there's nothing in there regarding blood spatter, is that correct?
That's correct.
On that date, once you
hanging
left
and
the
banging.
scene, it was your idea that there was no blood spatter on Lana Clarkson's hands. Is that true?
That's correct.
Okay, and later you learned that that was incorrect. Is that correct?
It depends how you describe the blood spatter, because there could be like mist-like stains versus big droplets, which is what my eye is looking for. Over the fingers and over the top part of the hand. What I found out later, there's mist-like stains only on the wrists and a little part of the back of the hand, which is a big difference in my view. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but that's what I learned later.
Okay. In any event, you looked at her hands and you evaluated her hands very carefully. Isn't that true?
Yes.
And the reason you did it for a lot of reasons,
shot
but
of-
one reason
shot
you
of the
did it
ghoul,
because you wanted to see
straight
if
on
she
shot.
had,
You get a side
like,
shot
let's
and a
say,
straight on shot.
some tissue or
Only here on
blood under
Murder
her
Church.
fingernails that might indicate she was in a struggle. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so you looked at all the ends of her fingers to see if you saw anything that might be out of the ordinary that would give you some information regarding her being in a struggle. Is that true?
Yes.
What did you look for? If you could tell the jury, what were you looking for that might have assisted you in explaining that she was in a struggle prior to her demise?
Because she had on a black jacket, long sleeve, it was hard at that time to assess the bruising, which I saw later, of course. It was hard to see the bruise at the scene that February 3rd because of the lighting, of course. I did look at her fingers. Most significant thing I found was the right thumb, the nail was cracked diagonally. And I thought that possibly might indicate a prior struggle. That's just my mind thinking. But I couldn't, of course, I looked for the nail myself, thinking it might be close to her clothing or on the carpet adjacent, and I saw nothing. But anyway, I didn't see any evidence of bruising to the fingers other than the back of the left hand that I described earlier for you.
Now, as far as the fingernail, did you actually see part of her nail missing?
No, the actual natural nail is present. It's called an acrylic nail. I'm sorry. That was
Karen Dusty,
that's the
thank you so
diagonal
much
one
for
that was
hanging this
missing.
morning. Really appreciate
Okay, so
it. Have a great
acrylic
day.
meaning
Not
non-human,
natural.
it's something that's put on?
Correct.
And I'll profess not to be an expert in female nails and what is put on, but what was your understanding as to what was missing?
A fake or acrylic nail.
Okay, was it the type that's painted on, or do you know?
I don't know.
Okay, so you don't know whether it's the type that's put on or painted on, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and there was a little sliver that was missing, is that correct?
About a little over a quarter of an inch.
Okay, at the tip of her right finger?
Yes.
Right thumbnail?
Yes.
Okay, so now what I was asking about that I want to kind of focus your attention on, if I can, Dr. Pena, is you examined all of the fingers and all the fingernails, and one of the things that you were looking for would be foreign material, like little traces of skin or blood on the fingers or fingernails. Is that true?
Yes, but our coroner criminalist ultimately would excise those nails and do the scrapings at a. I don't recall if she did it at the scene. I don't think so. It would be at the office.
Okay. In other words, there would be some evidence collection regarding that, even if you don't see something. But you look to see if there's something there, and there's got to be a reason why you look at those nails. Isn't that true?
That's
nice. There's an actual date for what we're seeing right now. May 30th, 07.
right.
Now, you actually looked at the broken nail, or the acrylic, and you looked at that nail a little bit more carefully because the acrylic was broken. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Okay, why were you looking at that
I
nail
saw
a little bit
that
more carefully?
Oasis cat.
Because
That would
the
be cool.
acrylic was broken.
I thought there might have been a struggle. That's
that
what I
was
was
pretty
thinking.
wild.
And the nail broke. But I don't know the status of that nail, whether it broke at that time or could have broken earlier in the day or the day before. I have no idea.
Okay, so, but you were looking at the nails because if a person is in a struggle and they're fighting with somebody, you might see a little bit of material that might be tissue that could later be tested, correct?
Yes.
Okay, or there might be a little bit of blood under the fingernails or on the portion of the nails that could be tested, and we might be able to find out if that person was in a struggle, one, and two, who that person was in a struggle with.
Correct.
So that's why you looked at it, essentially, isn't that
Yes.
correct? And the broken acrylic nail area, that was a particular concern because you saw the broken acrylic. Is that true?
Yes.
So when you looked at, let's say, the little finger on the right hand, did you see any blood or tissue on the little finger?
No.
How about the next finger, the ring finger?
No.
The index finger?
You mean the middle finger?
Right, the middle finger.
No.
The index finger, excuse me, the next
No.
one. And on the thumb that had the broken acrylic, no blood or tissue on that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the same would be true on the left hand. You didn't see any blood or tissue on any of the nails, fingers, etc. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's the
Is that
type of
correct?
thing that you do when you go to a scene, because it's a rare event.
Sorry,
you
what?
look for trace evidence to help you determine what happened or
reporter
didn't
put that in with a
happen.
T
Isn't that
instead of a
correct,
C?
Dr. Pena?
Yes.
So, in your experience, Dr. Pena, and I take it that you have not had very many cases where a female has died of a self-inflicted intraoral gunshot wound. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Have you had any cases where a female, a woman, has died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound, where you were involved in the autopsy and you did the postmortem examination?
Oh, I've had those, not too many, but I've had them.
Just give me a ballpark figure, about 10 to 20 maybe?
Overruled.
That sounds about right.
Okay, so it's not uncommon, and that's not unheard of that can occur. Is that true?
That's correct.
Okay, and you've read literature on this subject, is that correct?
Yes.
And it's discussed in the literature, women who die from intraoral gunshot wounds that are self-inflicted, is that correct?
Yes.
And one of the things that is looked at in the literature, and it's not covered extensively because it's not that common, but that sometimes
Look at him
a
color there.
fingernail or a piece of
That's a good
acrylic
shot of
gets
colors.
broken when a self-inflicted wound
Mug.
by a female
Next to
occurs
Shake-
because of them
Shake McShakerson.
triggering the gun. Isn't that true?
Shake, shake, shake. Shake, shake,
That's
shake.
incorrect.
Have you ever heard of that?
Never heard of it, never seen it.
I'm talking about the literature, because in your cases, you've never seen it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Does that mean it does not happen?
No, it can happen, but it'd be very, very rare from my experience.
Okay. And this acrylic doesn't
Highly
just break, it shatters. Is that
impossible.
correct?
I don't know that.
Okay. Do you know what these acrylic nails were made of?
I don't know the brand or the name of it in this particular case. I'm sorry.
Okay. And I don't either. But in any event, have you looked at the literature on the subject of nails being cracked or broken when self-inflicted wounds, deaths occur?
I tried to do that with firearms.
With firearms, with
I
guns.
tried to do that. I couldn't find anything. That was myself.
Okay. And is that something that, depending upon how much experience you have, you might see it more often than another forensic pathologist?
Objection, that's vague.
Overruled.
That's not true, because I checked with some of my staff members, the more senior people who've been there 30, even longer years, and then they've never seen one.
Okay. So the fact that somebody, whether it's a male or female, if they die of an interoral gunshot wound, the fact that their nail is not broken really doesn't mean anything as to whether it was self-inflicted or not. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. We've kind of gotten off track a little bit. We were originally talking about blood spatter. I want to kind of get back to that and differentiate the term blowback. That is a little different than blood spatter, and even though you're not an expert in that area, you agree that there's a big difference between those two types of evidence that are involved in a death investigation.
Objection, Your Honor. I think the witness indicated that he didn't know the difference, or didn't have an opinion as to the difference.
What is your testimony, sir? Do you have an opinion or not?
I'd rather not give one. I'm not comfortable with that.
You say you're not comfortable. Is that because you don't feel that you're qualified to
That's
give an opinion?
correct.
All right, the objection is sustained.
Now, with reference to a
Queen Olive coming through here. Coming through after the walk, presumably. And gifting out a membership to Irene. Get the hell in here, Irene. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much. Let's give you a little love. Little love in the house. Getting on the wheel and also becoming a member, which gives you access to some new videos that I'm starting to make. Actually, I'm going to have to get a new one on there. There's 3 on there currently that I think that is only accessible to members. But yeah, Irene, get the hell in here. Thank you again, Queen Olive Ruthann, getting right now on this list for a potential possible free shirt or winning a shirt. Boom. Get you on here real quick. Keep rocking, baby. Thank you. Beers in the chat, Navy Grogs in the chat. Let's go.
Talking about the subject of how much pressure can be created in an interoral gunshot wound when a weapon is discharged in the mouth. In other words, how much gas can build up in the cranial vault and when a gun is discharged.
Objection, foundation.
Well, I think by asking him is he comfortable, he's sort of asking is he
4 names on the new wheel.
So I'm gonna allow him to answer that.
No.
Okay, so you wouldn't know if there was 1,000 pounds per square inch versus 5 or 10,000 pounds per square inch if a gun is discharged in a mouth. Is that correct?
That's correct.
How would you learn about that if that became a particular question that you needed to address? Would you have to go to the research to do that?
Yes, or a firearms expert, perhaps, or a physics type person. They perhaps may know about foot-pounds and forces, etc. That may be helpful.
Okay, so
welcome
a
in here.
firearms expert would be somebody that knows about guns and ammunition and so forth, but how would that person know about interoral? In other words, what happens when the pressure builds up in a head, for example?
That I don't know. Perhaps they may know of how to go about that, but I certainly don't.
Right. Are there some forensic pathologists that know a lot about that combined area, a gun and a head and the combined issues? In other words, is that a specialty, so to speak, in your field?
Objection, relevance and speculation.
Overruled. He's asking if he knows if such a subspecialty exists. That's the import of the question. Are you aware of any such thing?
No, I'm not.
In your direct exam, you talked about blood on the hands. Is that true, Dr. Pena, to some extent?
I'm sorry?
In your direct examination, you talked about blood being on Lana Clarkson's hand or hands, wrists, things like that?
On my direct examination, or?
Yeah. Or you talked about that today. Maybe it was in response to one of my questions.
Yeah, I don't recall Mr. Jackson asking that question. I believe I was referring to Ms. Lintonmoot, the coroner criminalist, who saw that there were mist-like things, very small and actually very sparse on the wrist, which is not the back of the hand, and a little part of the hand, but nowhere else, on both left and right sides. I never saw them.
Okay, and did you see the body before Ms. Lintonmoot did her evidence collection?
No, we saw simultaneously together.
Okay, do you know whether she collected any of those stains or not?
She did collect them.
And kept them as evidence, I take it, is that
They
correct?
were turned over to the sheriff's department.
Okay, and do you know if you observed Lana Clarkson's hands and wrists before she collected them or after she collected them, if you can recall?
I cannot recall.
When you noted that there was some of these mist-like stains, did you know whether they were blowback or blood spatter, or what? Were you making a determination one way or the other?
Objection. If I heard the question correctly, it misstates the evidence. If the question was when he saw the blood on her wrist, I don't believe he said that he did see the blood on her wrist.
Rephrase.
You eventually saw some photographs that were taken of the hands and wrist of Miss Clarkson, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and you didn't see the blood that was on her hands or wrist at the time, is that correct?
That's correct.
And there was a big question that was raised in this case because the photographs were of poor quality to document this blood spatter, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so that became a big issue regarding this investigation. Is that also true?
Part, yes.
Okay, and you had nothing to do with photographing yourself, is that correct?
No.
But somebody had something to do with that, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so when the photographs were looked at, there was a big question, is the hands not being photographed accurately. Is that also true?
That calls for speculation.
It's also the way the question is phrased. It's a big question, so I'm going to sustain the objection, but you may rephrase it.
Were you ever involved in a meeting with Ms. Lintonmoot, the head chief medical examiner, Mr. Lakshman, where the issue of poor photography was discussed?
Somewhat. That was one of the issues, I believe, yes.
And some lost evidence also by somebody?
Yes.
Okay, and basically a number of concerns were raised by members of the district attorney's office to the coroner's office, and you had a meeting over that, correct?
Yes.
And one of the issues was the photography of the hands regarding blood and what was observed or not observed. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that was of interest to you because you didn't remember seeing any blood on the hands, and you were relying upon the photography in reaching some of the opinions that you're giving here today. Is that correct?
Objection.
Well, he's asking if it's correct, so he can testify.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt the court. The way it was phrased is he said, you testified that you didn't remember seeing any evidence of blood on the hands. That the witness's testimony is very clear. He's not saying he can't remember. He's saying he did not see blood.
Sustained, rephrase, and you'll do that after the break because we're going to take our recess. Ladies and gentlemen, keep in mind the admonition. We'll be in recess for 15 minutes.
Let's see where we're going next. Part 4, Dr. Pena. Is there really that many insane parts? What number is this? This is, okay, the next one is an hour. Okay, we got another hour in us. This is part 60, number 63, part 4. Whoa. We're going to be with Dr. Luis Pena for quite some time. Wow, you were not joking, Bassett Page. Holy shit, 16 parts. Before we move on. Oh my God. Wow. Then the next dude has 6 parts. Holy shit. Now we're going to keep trucking. I mean, he's a very important person in this trial thus far. With a lot of the information that only he has, quite frankly. Thanks everyone for hanging out today. I really appreciate it. We're going to go through for at least another hour here and hanging out here at Murder Church. Appreciate it. If you have not hit the like yet, maybe you just forgot, do that. It really helps us out. YouTube likes to be tickled like that. Share it out over on the old X machine. Everyone that has shared and done your part this morning, thank you all so freaking much. It's been awesome and having everyone come through. And yeah, we're going to keep rolling. Will is still in play, still checking the apps, and I think we have 4 names currently on the wheel, and we have 1 winner today, Wildside. And thanks, Wildside. I got all your information, so let's keep rolling.
All right, all parties, jurors, alternates, and the witness are present as heretofore. You may resume. Mr. Plord?
Your Honor, can I have the last question? Was the last question the one that
I know, I got to get out of it. I'm going to do it very soon.
He did mean to object, Your Honor. I take that position.
I want to get somebody to go with me. I need a buddy. Maybe get Dan. Oh, no.
Yeah. And that was of interest to you because you didn't remember seeing
Sheila, thank you so much for hanging out this morning. What to say?
Some of the same opinions that you're giving here today, is that correct?
Yeah, this son of a bitch is going to hold strong on this fucking wig. That's why I did get extra banners here so we can at least play around with the wigs.
Rephrase it.
Please rephrase.
The objection was sustained, and counsel was instructed to rephrase the question.
We're getting a new question.
Thank you.
I think I'll ask a new question. Right then.
Excellent idea.
Dr. Pena, in giving some of the opinions you gave here today before this jury, did you rely on looking at photographs that were created by either investigators from your office or people that were from outside your office of the decedent here, Lana Clarkson?
From our office, yes.
Okay, and did they include photographs, and you were shown some of them on direct examination, of the way the body looked at the scene, is that correct?
Yes.
And so, along with everything else, you considered photographic evidence in, helping you come to the opinions and conclusions that you're giving regarding this case, is that true?
Yes.
And does the coroner's office have somebody that documents the way things look at a particular death scene?
I don't quite understand the question, I'm sorry.
Okay, photographs document what something looks like at a particular time and place. You would agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, does the coroner's office have a technician or somebody that does that, takes pictures basically at a scene?
We have our autopsy photographers who do go to scenes, that's correct.
Okay, and did you were shown some pictures on direct examination, were they taken by people in your office or by somebody different?
Those were taken by someone in our office.
Okay, and so how does that, what do they take pictures of? What's the purpose of them taking pictures? If you could explain that to the jury as far as your role in this case.
Well, one would be, of course, for trauma. We want to take both left and right hands in general, and other factors in this case, perhaps if we could see sooting on the hand or the fingers. Stippling is another thing in this case we want to look for if present, or if there's any pinching from the trigger itself. Sometimes we look for that if indeed a suicide is considered, which of course I have to rule out. You can see that in on the shooting hand. That's looked for, but hopefully to get photographed, it depends.
Okay, but photography is an important part of an investigation in a death scene investigation, is that correct?
Yes.
And why is it important?
Because that's, given the time frame, between, especially in LA County, between the cases, when the case is done or viewed and when it goes to trial, it could be a number of years. So we do rely on photos for recollection, especially death scene photos can be important.
Okay, and as part of the photography, is it part of the investigation to take pictures of blood that is either on the hands, wrists, or arms of a decedent?
They'll try, yes.
Okay, was there a problem in this case regarding that?
Yes, there was.
Okay, just tell the jury what the problem was.
Well, I can only tell you what I believe. I'm not a photographer, but I believe the problem here would be the lens itself used in this case. We don't have sometimes the correct lenses to get what are called close-ups to show in detail the features, for instance, on Miss Clarkson's particular hands. Because of her skin colors, she's a lot lighter in color.
Okay, and there was some complaint about the fact that the blood that was on her hands and wrists was not properly photographed, is that correct?
Yes.
Poor photography, basically.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you looked at her hands and did the examination that you have testified about, and you don't remember even seeing it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, with reference to Ms. Clarkson and the scene, did you look at her fingers to see if she had any soot from gunshot residue on her hands anywhere?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you observe any?
No.
Okay, and what were you looking for? In other words, I used the term soot, and you used that term this morning, and explain to the jury what you would be looking for as it relates to the term soot.
I'd be looking for a black grayish color discoloration, particularly over the shooting hand. In her case, she's right-handed. Of course, at that time, I didn't know that. I checked both hands. Again, it's black grayish, kind of like grease in a way, over the fingers, maybe perhaps of the right hand, back of the hand, thumb, palm part, and again, I didn't see any.
Okay, if somebody had their hands up and somebody shot near their hands, you might find some soot on their hands, even though the bullet missed their hands?
Yes.
And so you didn't see that, is that correct?
Not to my eye, no.
Okay. And there's some swabbing, or which are chemical tests, which are called gunshot residue testing that was done, but you can't visually see all of that, correct?
Correct. It's a sticky adhesive they actually use. That's what it is.
And they're looking for microscopic particles to see whether or not somebody could have shot a gun.
Objection. That's not evidence beyond the scope of direct examination.
Are you able to answer that question, sir? Do you have the ability to answer that?
I best not. I don't feel comfortable.
All right, the objection sustained.
You rely upon the tests that are done by others as it relates to gunshot residue, the non-visible gunshot residue. Is that correct?
Yes.
In this case, Mr. Steve Dowell, who is a criminalist that works for your office, did some work in this case?
Yes.
You met with him a number of times on that subject. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we'll get to that, but let's get back to the hands and the photography and the fingers and so forth. If somebody discharges a weapon in their mouth, self-inflicted, do you necessarily see soot on their fingers or hands?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay, so the absence of that doesn't suggest to you that somebody could not have done that. Is that true?
That's correct.
And there's actually literature on that subject where that is discussed. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, with reference to this blood on the hands, and we will talk about the nature of that, have there been studies on that to determine how often that if somebody shoots themselves that they might end up with blood on their hands or wrists?
Yes.
Okay, and are there some cases, a number of cases, where people shoot themselves and they get absolutely no blood on their hands or wrists?
That's correct.
Okay, so the fact that there is no blood on their hands and wrists doesn't mean that they did not shoot themselves.
That's correct.
Okay, and the fact that if there is blood on their hands or wrists, it just suggests that they may have done that as a result of shooting themselves.
That's partly correct, but you got to think of the flip side too, because the other side is that they could have been in the vicinity as the weapon's being discharged. So if you look at me for a second, another person could be firing the weapon, their hands could be over that weapon, and the blowback, as I've been describing, could be coming out of the mouth, and they're protecting themselves, and it could go onto the hands. But that doesn't necessarily mean, that they're shooting themselves. They could be protecting themselves also. So there's two ways to look at it.
Okay, now you used that term blowback, and as I understand your testimony, though, you're not claiming to be an expert in that blood spatter blowback area. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in this particular case, did you, as it relates to whatever blood was on Ms. Clarkson's hands or wrist, did you consult with somebody who was an expert that told you about that, or gave you an opinion about that, or wrote a report that you may have read, any of those?
No, I just refer to the literature actually on that. I did discuss informally with some of the older medical examiners in our office about.
I'm going to take a picture. I'm going to take a screen grab. I'm going to make an emoji of our new friend.
And we don't particularly find it very useful, to be honest with you. And the paper, one journal article I did look at for this case to kind of help me out basically says the same thing.
Was that in the American Journal of Forensic Medicine and Pathology?
No, it's a different journal, Forensics, I think International. It's the best one that's in Dr. DeMaio's book that he references.
Okay. Do you happen to know the name of that by chance? The article that you referred to?
I don't have it with me. I can bring it tomorrow if you'd like.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that, Dr. Pena. If we could have the pictures that the people used, I forget what the exhibit number was. I think it was 40, is it 44?
Which one are you referring to?
The pins?
48 through 51.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Those are not the same.
Okay, let's... Why don't we mark this next in order, Your Honor? These are pictures of
Lord.
decedent's hands at different views.
Double J?
Double J.
Double J, Jeff Jarrett.
You see these
J-E, double F, J-A, double R, E, double T, double J.
photographs, Dr. Pena, that's been marked
You know.
as Exhibit JJ?
Yes.
And are you familiar with these photographs?
Yes, I am.
And just like the other photographs that you looked at, they have in some of them, they have the coroner's ruler with the date and the indication that it's at the death scene. Is that correct?
Yes.
And looking at the top left-hand photograph, do you see that where there's appears to be some blood on the bottom of the wrist, and also it looks like a drop of blood somewhat near the web of the hand?
Yes.
Okay, do you know whether that's a blood drop or a blood spatter, or are you really qualified to opinion as to that?
I'm not qualified.
Okay, and so you wouldn't know which direction the blood was going when it hit the hand, and you haven't consulted with anybody on that subject, is that correct?
No.
Okay, and even though you're not an expert as to this blood spatter that was, to the extent it was photographed on Ms. Clarkson's hand, you have read some literature, talked to people within your office concerning it, is that correct?
Yes.
And this would be the type of spatter that sometimes never occurs even though somebody dies of a self-inflicted wound, is that correct?
Well, the blood spatter I'm referring to is actually, there's a good picture in Dr. DeMaio's book. It's really abundant over the finger areas of the shooting hand and the back of the hand. It's not referring to little drops like that, nor a description like Ms. Linton gave in her report. These are very evident, and that's at least what I'm looking for, if at all.
Okay. And again, this is something you look for references of, but there's some people that die of a self-inflicted gunshot wound that have a lot of this on them, and there's some that have none.
That's correct.
So it runs a range. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And is there a difference when it's an intraoral, inside the mouth wound, as opposed to a wound to the temple? In other words, does that factor into if you know?
You know, I don't know that. That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know.
Now, if we could look at the other photographs, look at the top, or the two to the left, top and bottom. Those are the ones that were of poor quality, that were questioned as to to whether they were useful or not?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Dr. Pena, did you ever meet with Dr. Lynn Harold regarding this case?
Only at our meetings in my notes, on the 42 notes, in July and August of 2003, that I document where she's present at the LA County Coroner's Office.
There you go.
I saw her another time at her office regarding a missing tooth.
Okay, which happened first? Which meeting?
It was July 22nd, I believe.
That was the last meeting, correct?
The last meeting is in August, I believe, around the August, let me check here real quick. It'd be August 14th on the 42.
There we go.
Okay, and when you say 42, I wanted to...
Our
is
new
that the
friend
form that we're
has an
talking about
emoji.
It's a business record for the coroner's office?
Yes.
And it's similar to the other form that we talked about, only it describes a different event, but you still put it in your file, is that correct?
Yeah, these are title worksheets, by the way.
Okay, so 42 is a worksheet, basically.
Yes.
Okay, and it might deal with either a scene investigation or a meeting where you document what occurs and what information you might get at the meeting?
Yes.
And if you had meetings, let's say, with somebody from the district attorney's office, you would use this same form. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so you had 2 meetings with Dr. Lynn Harold, and she actually doesn't work for the coroner's office, does she?
No.
She is a person that works for the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department Crime Laboratory?
Yes.
She's what's known as a criminalist, is that correct?
Yes.
And do you know whether or not, based upon your meetings with her, whether she deals with the issue of blood spatter or blood blowback or any subject like that?
I don't know. That's a good
I think YouTube is kind of broken today, Julio. My number of things in the background have been crazy. Like 1 second will be 40 people here, the next second will be 20 people here, and it's just been bouncing.
I don't know that one.
Okay, so obviously you didn't
I can't get a
discuss
real
that
feel
with
of what's
her in
actually
these
happening.
meetings, I take it. Is that correct?
Probably not, no.
And did you get any reports from her, written reports or
It usually bounces it,
things that came to you either by email or
that
whatever
drastic.
regarding blood spatter or
It's been happening
blowback or
all
anything
morning.
like that?
No.
Okay, so the only information you got from Dr. Harold was from these 2 meetings that you talked about, correct?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that one of the meetings was regarding the subject of lost evidence and really didn't deal with the specifics of the case as far as her criminalistic work. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, was that first or which one was first, if you remember?
Oh, the first meeting is a general meeting with most of the crime lab people from the LA Sheriff's Department. That's the one in July. The second one is on August 14th, because we're getting close at that point, trying to figure out when to close the case. We still need all
Oh,
the
man,
information.
Julio. All right, Peter, Julio, my old dog passed away on Friday of 16 years. That's a long life, though, and I bet you gave Julio a good one. That's horrible, though, man. I hate to hear that. $199 there. I'll get you on the wheel. Maybe you'll win a shirt, though.
We turn them immediately back over to the crime lab.
That sucks. That's horrible.
Those don't become part of our file. And ultimately, I had another meeting with Lynn Harold. That's the one we were referring to with the tooth, which is later.
Okay, well, we'll talk about the first business meeting, meaning the one that where you're really talking about information that she was trying to, trying to give you information.
Kathy coming in behind it and says she's feeling lucky for the next spin with another 420. Again, if you know, you know. Kathy doubling her odds for a possible win spin, and again, coming through the Cash App. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Let's go. Not messing around is one thing we're not doing. Huh? What are we not doing today? Huh?
Dead anyway, man.
That dude, huh?
Hold up. Hold up. Hold up. Respect my house.
Get them, baby.
That might help you with your job. Is that correct?
Yes.
Even though she worked with a different agency.
Correct.
6.
And so that
halfway to
happened on
a
the
another
22nd
will
of,
spin.
July of 2003.
Will we get it this
is that
morning? Only
correct?
time will tell.
And in addition to her being at the meeting, do you have a note and a record of that meeting?
Yes, I do.
And did you detail
that's terrible.
who was
Don't
there
hate that.
and what the meeting was about and what information you learned that was pertinent to this case?
Yes.
And just like your notes of the scene investigation, you were obligated to keep this in the file, and you have done that. Is that correct?
Yes.
And accurately record what information you learned. Is that also true?
Correct.
So at the meeting, you indicate in your note, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you were there along with Dr. Harold, looks like Detective Mark Lillenfeld. Is that correct?
Yes.
And another detective, I can't read his
that's
name.
Paul Fournier.
Fournier, okay. And then Mr. Carroll, I think you mentioned he had something to do with guns. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did he give you information that you considered in this case also, Mr. Carroll?
Yes.
And then there was another detective by the name of Katz. Is that true?
Yes.
And another lieutenant something?
That's Daniel Rosenberg, Rosenberg.
Okay, and then Miss Nelson is also there?
Yes.
And Miss Lintemoot is also there. Is that correct?
I see that picture that
So
you posted, or
basically,
that
it's a
article
meeting
that you
about
posted
this
in
case
Discord
with all
under the Murder
people
Church
that are
Side Bassett page, and yeah, what a strange choice of picture.
dealing with some of the forensic evidence
Shock
involved
value,
in
I
this
guess?
case. Is that true?
Yes.
And did Miss Lintemoot, for example, explain to you in that meeting about the blood being on the hands, or did that subject come up at all?
Not at that time, no.
Now, when you
Welcome back in here, Gabby.
were at this meeting, was it arranged so that you could come to a
Burns,
final
good morning,
opinion in
good
this
morning. Get in here.
case?
It was mainly to give us an update where they were with their studies on all the evidence, because there's so much to go through. And I did get some information at this time, though it was preliminary, they call it. And that's what I was noting.
Okay. So did Miss Harold talk to you about blood that was on the gun?
Yes.
And did she talk to you about DNA testing that was done on the gun?
Yes.
And did she talk to you about DNA testing that was done on the non-blood-stained areas of the gun?
Yes.
And did you learn in this meeting, and did you take into consideration the information that you received through the Sheriff's Department Crime Laboratory, along with Dr. Harold, that all of the DNA testing on both the blood-stained areas and the non-blood-stained areas came back to Lana Clarkson?
Correct.
And do you know anything about DNA testing at all, Dr. Pena?
No, I'm not up to date on that, no.
Okay. Well, you know something about it, I take it. Is that correct?
Very little, but...
Like we were talking about this morning a little bit, or earlier actually, about the blood or tissue that can be under fingernails, and when there's a struggle that if you see it, you for sure want to collect it because you can do DNA testing on it, correct?
Yes.
And even if you don't see it, they cut the fingernails off and they test it to see if there's some foreign biological material that would go to a person that is other than the person you cut the fingernails from. Is that correct?
Correct.
It wouldn't be a big interest to find somebody's DNA under their own fingernails. That's not the issue, is it?
Right.
Okay. So you always expect to find their DNA. Is that true?
Yes.
It's when you have foreign DNA that it becomes important as it relates to fingernails and guns and objects, correct?
Yes.
And do you know enough about DNA to know that basically there can be trace amounts of DNA on objects that people just touch and handle?
Objection.
If you know.
No, the bottom line is I'm going to sustain the objection. If you have a specific question, you can go ahead and ask it, and we'll see if he's able to answer it.
Did Ms. Harold, in addition to talking about the gun and the DNA testing that was done on the blood-stained areas as well as the non-blood-stained areas, and all of that DNA being identified to herself, Lana Clarkson, did you talk about any DNA testing that was done on the bullets of that?
Hey, thank you, Julio. Appreciate that. Yeah, YouTube's being weird today.
Concerning the non-blood-stained portions of the gun.
Sustained to the way the question was phrased. You may rephrase it.
We already talked about the gun.
I'll stand up and stretch my back real quick. It's bothering me.
Is it your understanding, or was it your understanding when you had this meeting back in July of 2003, that there were some bullets in the gun that were not fired?
Yes.
Okay. There was one bullet that was fired, correct?
Correct.
Okay. That would be still in the gun. The casing would still be in the gun, and it would have you could tell what it looked like because there would be no projectile in the casing, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And there were 5 bullets that were not fired, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And do you, at this particular meeting, do you remember discussing the Sheriff's Department Crime Laboratory testing of the bullets that were not fired?
No.
Okay. Do you remember discussing anything with Mr. Carroll regarding the weapon and the particular features of that particular weapon?
No.
Okay, so other than what we've already talked about, did you talk about the test firing of that weapon?
Yes.
Okay, and what was it about the test firing that was of import to you or importance to you, if any, at that meeting?
Well, he test fired it, and I have 2 numbers here from muzzle to target. So I was describing to you earlier this morning. He gives
I'm going to use the bathroom
measurement
also.
of
Be
2
right back.
inches as a test fire, but he's considering the oral of 2 inches from muzzle to target, and another one about 3 inches. And it tells me that it's loosely held in the mouth, so it's not a tight contact wound or tight contact or forced down the throat, but it's loosely held, as I'm demonstrating now, behind the teeth in the mouth.
Okay. When you say 2 to 3 inches to the target, what do you mean by target? What do you...
Where it ultimately will end up or go through, the first tissue to strike.
Okay. And how did Mr. Carroll make that determination that you relied upon?
Objection. Call suspect.
Sustained.
Okay. What did Mr. Carroll tell you that helped you in evaluating this particular case?
We did not get into that part.
Okay. He gave you a range, 2 to 3 inches?
Yes.
Okay, and do you know what he did to come to that conclusion?
Well, he test fires the weapon, but I don't know how that's done.
Okay, so you relied upon that conclusion, basically, that he gave you. Is that true?
Yes.
And based upon all the information that you had, did you have any information that the weapon was 2 to 3 or more than 3 inches from the target?
No, I didn't.
Closer than 2 inches to the target?
No.
Okay, so you relied upon that as being the range from the target, which is the back of the throat. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, now you measured this wound that was on the tongue, and this is the stellite wound, is that correct?
Yes, stellate, that's correct.
Okay, and the stellite wound, is that caused by the bullet itself, or does the gas from the gun that's ejected have anything to do with how that wound is made?
It'd actually be more from the bullet.
Okay, and do the gases contribute to that wound at all?
They can actually.
Is that a little beyond your expertise as to, you mentioned that you're not overly familiar with gunshot wound gases and pressures and so forth, so is that something that's a little bit outside the range of your qualifications?
Yes.
Okay. So did you learn anything else in this meeting as to the results of any testing, like let's say, for example, the results of a sexual assault kit or anything like that?
2 months, Gabby. Seems small compared to ones from earlier, but that's awesome. That's cool. Yeah, I'm glad that we've known each other for that long, or at least about that time anyways. Gabby, thank you so much. Freaking awesome. Give you a little love here.
Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
The sexual assault kit was negative.
Okay. And what's meant by that? If you could explain to the jury what is involved in that
Gabby's
conclusion.
one of the coolest New Buzz Nation members, man. She's hilarious.
Were tested for in the laboratory. They do not match to anyone's DNA or nothing that's picked up. So there's no ejaculatory material, etc., if I understand that correctly.
Okay. If I could have next in order, Your Honor.
That would be KK.
KK. And that would be this note that's dated 7/22/03, 2429. Dr. Pena, I've marked this note that we've been talking about that references this meeting, and you put some of your opinions and conclusions in this note. Is that correct? And is that correct?
Yes.
Now, eventually you authored a formal autopsy report and signed it and basically issued the case out. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that was eventually done like in September. Is that true?
Yes.
And you actually started writing it, though, in July. In fact, the July 29th, shortly after this meeting. Is that true?
Yes.
In fact, your opinions and conclusions were basically the 29th of July of '03, and then it just took you a lot of time to kind of get it typed up and edited and so forth. Is that true?
Actually, the gap there was we're waiting for some actually final reports to come in, and there were vacation periods for the sheriff people, and then there's also the cases on security hold. So we didn't want anything to leak out, and we wanted to make sure, double check everything because of the nature of the case, being what's called a high profile. And that's why there's a little time gap between July and up to September.
So at the conclusion of this particular meeting, you make a statement in here called physical evidence will not answer mode. And what did you mean by mode?
Oh, that's a sloppy
Got
term.
you,
I should
Leo?
say manner of death.
We get all there real quick.
That's the same thing, but I prefer to say manner, but I wrote mode.
Okay.
I was at that time, I remember Miss Lynn Harold, Dr. Harold was talking with me, and she said the investigation issue will, but that's in July.
Yo, Eve 6, thanks for that share. Appreciate
So
it.
I need to make that clear that things can change, and I know in August when we have our next meeting, it essentially boils down to the totality of evidence. So it wasn't one single piece of item that was going to answer the manner of death in this case. We had to take into consideration everything that we've gone through.
Now, let me ask you this question, Dr. Pena. In the field that you're involved in, do you ever use the term or have an opinion that you hold to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Not in our office in general, no.
So when you give an opinion like something could have happened, do you value that at all as being more likely than not? Or, what do you mean by that when you give an opinion that something is like consistent with?
It generally means it's favorable, but there's enough evidence to support
okay,
it.
never mind.
Could it be something else? Certainly. Nothing's 100% in our field, and most medical examiners realize that. And later on, even, new information can come in after a case has been closed. And that's why when you read my opinion, if you look at the very last sentence I write, based on the history and circumstances as currently known, the manner of death in this case is homicide. Doesn't mean later if I get information or further input.
Boom, just repost it for you.
Even today?
No, not today, no.
Okay, so it never will change.
I have to remember
after
Eve
today?
6 is
Okay.
Julio.
Now, with reference to your opinion, I'm showing you Exhibit KK. Basically, you make this statement: physical evidence will not answer mode. INV, investigation issue will, is that correct?
Yes.
Am I reading your note accurately?
Yes.
And does it have to do with the investigation outside of the Sheriff's Department Crime Laboratory?
Yes.
And so that's like statements, you mentioned statements after...
Oh, that's actions?
Actions, okay, et cetera, indicate homicide, and then there's something under that, and I can't read that. Can you tell us what that is?
Sorry, need to review these. Let LA Sheriff's Department comment on ballistics.
Okay. Need summary.
LA Sheriff's Department on basis for homicide.
Yeah, okay, and so when you say LA Sheriff's Department, you're not talking about the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department Crime Laboratory, you're talking about the investigative arm of the Sheriff's Department, is that correct?
At that time, yes.
Okay, so you were still waiting on that, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you ever get that?
Yes.
Okay, and did you get that verbally or in writing?
If I recall, that's mainly verbally.
Okay, verbally from the detectives?
Yes.
Okay, and we'll close, need Dr. Sherry's presence something 2 weeks, is that correct?
Yes.
And then we had the vacations and that got delayed a little bit, essentially, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, let me ask you, as far as the cause of death, that's a medical finding, essentially, the cause of death being a bullet wound that caused damage to certain areas of the body. Is that true?
Yes.
And have you ever used the term, well, you have used the term to a reasonable degree of medical certainty in giving opinions in your field as to cause of death. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And when you use that term, well, let me ask you this. Can you state to this jury at this time, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, that Lana Clarkson died of an intraoral gunshot wound to the head and neck?
Yes.
Okay, and is there any question or doubt about that in your mind, Doctor?
No.
Okay, and the basis of your opinion would be all the physical evidence and medical findings that you either observed at the scene, saw at the autopsy, or learned as far as testing afterwards to areas of the body.
That's correct.
And one of the experts that you relied upon is a person that uses the term odontologist. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what is an odontologist?
They're basically dentists.
Okay, it's a dentist who deal with issues related to
Odinism.
death and
Odontologist. I will
issues
tell you
regarding
all of the
teeth.
witchcraft
Is that correct?
secrets.
Yes.
Okay, and
The warlocks
one of the
come
options
from
that
a
you
dark
have when
time.
you look into a case is that you can
Out of
ask
the mountains.
other people who are more specialized as doctors or medical professionals to do certain work. Is that correct?
Yes.
Like you mentioned the toxicology work, and you mentioned the criminalists doing some work, and gunshot residue people, and another one is odontology, correct?
Yes.
So what did the odontologist do to contribute to your understanding of this case?
Basically, when I was at the death scene, I found present on the carpet area and also part on the stairway of the home what I thought were tooth fragments, and I alerted the Sheriff's Department. They collected them because their upper two front teeth are gone, basically, and shattered. So I wanted the odontologist, to verify that and see if indeed these belong to Ms. Clarkson.
One of the things that you wanted to know is whether or not there were any tooth particles that had what is referred to as bullet wipe on them. Is that correct?
Oh, that'd be part of it, yes.
Okay, and this would be to the teeth that were in the mouth that did not get dislodged, is that correct?
That I don't remember.
But the particles of teeth that were basically not in the mouth, you wanted to have them analyzed for what's called bullet wipe, is that true?
Correct.
And who takes care of that? Does the odontologist do it or does somebody else do it?
I believe that would be the crime lab.
And that would be Mr. Dowell, is that correct?
Mr. Dell or the crime lab people could do it.
Okay, Mr. Dowell works in your office?
Yes.
He's a criminalist also?
He's actually called a tool analysis.
Okay. And why did you want these tooth particles that were found at the scene that you helped locate looked at for bullet wipe?
Actually, I don't recall myself requesting that.
Okay. Why is it looked for? In other words, what would be the reason for looking for that?
Oh, well, basically, it would confirm that, well, first of all, bullet wipe, is that your term you're using?
That's
bullet wipe. Basically, again, when a bullet comes out, the muzzle down the barrel, it's taking soot with it and grease also. Don't worry about the term lead, that's a misnomer that's used sometimes, but it's grease and powder, gunpowder coming out. And it doesn't tell you anything about distance. It just tells you that those particles are present. Again, the grease from the barrel and also the soot. And be honest with you, I don't know what part it would play in this case because it doesn't tell you anything about range of fire, as far as I know, bullet wipe. So anyway.
Well, if there was some traces of the bullet on the teeth, it would indicate the gun was outside the mouth, wouldn't it? Wasn't that the reason for doing the testing?
Yes.
Okay, and do you recall asking that be done?
I don't recall.
Do you recall being at a meeting when that was requested?
I don't recall.
Now, in addition to meeting with people, do you also express your opinion to attorneys in any way? In other words, that you meet with somebody who might be prosecuting a case? Do you ever do that?
Only after a case is closed and cause of death is official and manner of death is official, and that report is signed, then and only then do we meet with both defense counsel if needed, or anybody for that matter, on assign the case.
Okay, and do you remember meeting with anybody from the district attorney's office in October of 2003, within about a month of your issuing this case?
Yes.
Okay, and do you remember Mr. Dixon being there and a number of other deputy DAs?
Yes.
And do you remember taking notes of that meeting?
Yes, I do.
And do you have those notes in your official file and part of the record in this case?
Yes.
And when you meet and take notes, sometimes you give information to them and you note what you say. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And did you do that in this particular case?
Yes.
And did you do it accurately to the best of your ability?
Yes.
And on one of these forms, Form 42, same type of forms that you used as to these other aspects of the case. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. 2421, next in order, Your Honor.
Would be double L.
Double L. I want you to look at the top of this document. It's a pages of notes. Do you recognize this document, Dr. Pena?
Yes.
If you look at the top, it gives the date of October 14th, and then it tells you who's present at the meeting, and this is all your handwriting, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you took these notes at or about the time that the event occurred, the meeting occurred, is that true?
Yes.
Now, and it lists everybody there, the deputy DA's present, DRLS, is that Dr. Laschlaman, the head medical examiner?
Yes.
Your boss, essentially, is that true?
Yes.
Okay, and it said that Dr. Sherry happened not to be there, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And do you recall during the course of this meeting giving your statements regarding the issues regarding cause and manner of death?
Let me see here, do you don't mind?
Yeah, do you want to take a moment to review this note to refresh your recollection as to this meeting?
Just about half a minute, thanks.
Sure, take a minute, let me know when you're done.
Okay.
Okay. Do you get a chance to look at that?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Does that help you out at all as far as remembering what was discussed and some of the opinions you had? And this was after you issued your your final report. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you give a number of reasons, basically 4 reasons why you felt this was a homicide as opposed to not a suicide or self-inflicted wound. Is that correct?
Yes, but one thing I need to make clear on these notes, these do not become part of the official autopsy report per se, but they do become the official reports of the autopsy file, so there's a difference. But I'm thinking out loud in this meeting, and I'm trying to think of ways of anatomically, when we get into this, that's what I'm doing here. So when you hear this, I'm thinking on my feet. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, very good. I want to go to reason number 3 here. Blowback's blood on hand to steady nozzle is not present. There's no blood on the hand, is what you were saying?
That's correct.
Okay, and at the time you had this meeting, that was your opinion as to whether or not there was blood on the hand. Is that correct?
I was given, yeah, one opinion. That's correct.
Okay, and basically you were giving an opinion as a result of a question made by a DA by the name of Kevin McCormick, I would presume. Is that correct?
That's
somebody
correct.
You know?
Yes.
And Mr. Dixon, this distinguished gentleman here, right in court, was there also?
Yes.
And basically what he posed to you was a question after you signed this case out as a homicide that basically he asked you, without any information from the crime lab, you couldn't say this was a homicide. Is that essentially what you said?
That's correct.
Okay, and I just want to make sure I understand your note here.
Hold on, I'm sorry. I just want to clarify that. I'm being asked that question by Mr. McCormick, wanted to know, just from the autopsy alone, without outside input from the crime lab, is it possible to say this is still a homicide?
And your answer was no.
That's correct.
Okay. And when you say the crime lab, in other words, you're talking about the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department Crime Laboratory, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it doesn't include your own crime laboratory in the coroner's office, because you definitely considered all that well before this, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so what was it from the crime lab that told you that this was a homicide that you answered in response to Mr. McCormick's question in the presence of Mr. Dixon and others?
Basically, that includes everything from the statement that I made earlier, which is part of the LA Sheriff's Department. The statement made. The ballistics about the gun manipulation or being wiped was quite important. That was discussed. And again, Dr. Hale will go into more detail on that. The the alleged perpetrator, the left front pocket that I described this morning with the blood, significant blood stains that I described for you was present, was very important. And there were other clothing articles that came in that I do not put on this form because they came in at a later time. And in fairness to counsel, I did not want to muddy the waters, but there's about 3 or 4 other items that come in which Dr. Harrell will go through for you. And but this was sufficient for me at that time. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
There was 4 things that you mentioned. You gave your 4 reasons. One was the wiping of the gun, that you relied on that as a key fact. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then also that it was people who shoot themselves don't do so in private.
I'm sorry, they do so
in private versus public. Okay,
that's correct.
And then third was the blood on the hand, and at that time you mistakenly understood that there was none. Is that correct?
That's right.
And then later on, people from the...
No objection, Your Honor. That assumes facts, not evidence. That is not what the witness said. That the way the question was phrased, you mistakenly assumed there was none on the hand. The witness has indicated...
Sustained to the form of the question. Just rephrase it.
Okay, your note says that blood on the hand to steady the nozzle is not present. Am I reading that line correctly?
Yes.
Okay. And did I say nozzle or muzzle? The muzzle, that's the end of the gun, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And fourth, she did not know where the weapon was in the residence.
Correct.
Those are the 4 reasons that you gave at this time when you were meeting with the prosecutorial attorneys that were discussing this case with you at that time. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, when somebody
dies of an interoral
This guy should have brought a
gunshot
sleeping
wound,
bag, a tent.
does
You're
anything
sleeping
else come out of
in the
mouth
witness
other
chair, sir.
than blood?
This is your new life.
You could get some residual tissue from the oral cavity, called our mucosa, or we all have it. It's moist on our gums. Part of that can come out, though you won't see it sometimes to your eye, but some of the tissue can come out. I've rarely seen brain for that from that area, given the location, like the spinal column I told you about earlier, the spinal cord, to come out, given that location that Ms. Clarkson had suffered. Brain I have, if it's to the skull, that'll come out. And mainly that's it.
Okay, and do you consider what happens to that tissue and that matter as it relates to manner of death and how the death occurred?
I'm sorry, the tissue that comes out?
In other words, if there's some on the people that are involved?
Oh, no.
Okay. How far can that go? In other words,
I've never...
Are you able to answer that question based on your own expertise, or are you unable? Just tell me one way or the other.
I can answer that question.
The objection's overruled.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, as medical examiners, we can only deal with what's inside that body. Anything that comes outside of that body, whether it be blood, tissue, under the coat, that's nice to know it's there. It's on the right side, left side. That's great. But what are you going to do with it? That's the other question. It's very difficult to determine from that and make assessments of that, of where a perpetrator may be or where the shooter may be. I've seen this done before by other people. It's not correct. It's not science, because there's so many variables. That's where I have a problem. Now, but it's okay to describe it. It's okay to run. It's very academic. It's interesting. I'm sorry. Do that again.
But it's okay to describe it. It's okay.
It's okay to note it. But to interpret it is, in our medical examiner profession, I don't know any medical examiners that would even try to do that.
Yeah, Dr. Pena, you were asked a number of questions about the angle that the bullet went in, and if a person was standing up straight, it was in a slightly upward trajectory, the bullet path, assuming the anatomically up and down position. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But you don't have an opinion as to whether the head was tilted forward, backward, or anything such as that. Is that true?
That's right.
Now, in addition to something coming out of the mouth, is tissue and blood, does it ever get expelled from the nose in an interoral gunshot wound?
I've seen it mainly from the mouth, and I'm sure it depends on the devastation of the cavity, because we're all connected, our sinuses, et cetera. It can't come out the nose.
And the gases go in, and they've got to come out in somewhere, either the mouth or the nose, essentially. Is that correct?
Part of it, yes.
And when they come out, tissue and blood and whatever else comes out with it. Is that true?
True.
And you don't have an expertise, and you can't really tell us what happens to it once it gets out and what it might mean. Is that also correct?
Because as medical examiners, we do not do that. That's why I can't tell you anything.
Have you looked at any research or medical research in the field of forensic pathology on this subject?
There is none.
Okay. None that you're aware of, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so there might be some that you're not aware of, is what you're saying?
That begs the question, obviously.
Do you know whether there is any that you're just not aware of? In other words, have you heard about it but not looked at it?
He said he's not aware of any.
Okay,
so that's the best answer he can give you.
What's the court's pleasure on time? My watch says
4 o'clock. You have a ways to go?
Yes.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our evening recess. Keep in mind the
Do you
admonition
have a ways to
will
go?
resume tomorrow at
Many
9:30.
days,
Witnesses
sir.
excused. You're not to discuss your testimony with anyone except the attorneys. All right, 9:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you.
We're still going to be rolling for about 14 minutes here with something.
Now or tomorrow morning, I'm happy to be here.
They got some kind of motion.
Prepare.
One of court's pleasures, the one that I think is important is our request to defer certain witnesses.
Okay.
If they're next up, we need to have some idea of where that's going. And tomorrow morning will be fine, but for now, if the court's prepared to...
There's an in limine motion to preclude rebuttal witnesses from being called in the people's case in chief. I've read and considered.
And...
okay. It's your motion.
My motion, and I think it's well taken. That's not appropriate because these witnesses have been called. I don't have anything to add other than what I said in the motion as far as our reasons and who the witnesses are and so forth. So.
Okay, thank you. People?
Your Honor, we don't think they're rebuttal witnesses. The court has basically heard a very long 402 motion on this, if you view it in a certain way. We believe that Stan White's testimony plus Sarah Kaplan's testimony indicates that evidence was taken from the crime scene, and Stan White described what that evidence was, a fingernail with lead wipe or bullet wipe on it. Sarah Kaplan's testimony seems to back that up. We now have a picture of what we believe it is, and the next level of evidence or the next series of witnesses here is going to be crime scene, and then we were going to follow up with Stan White, who says something else was there at the crime scene, describe it. Sarah Kaplan would describe it also, and Lynn Harold through the photographs could say, well, if what Stan White describes is it, then she would tell us what, in her scientific opinion, that means. We think this is part of our affirmative case, and we believe it's admissible now. We don't think we are limited to just rebutting Dr. Henry Lee. If Henry Lee never testified, we still think evidence of this fingernail with lead wipe on it is admissible in our case in chief in front of this jury. That's why we know.
Oh, sound getting weird. Hold on. Just saw that. Some fajita noises going down.
Notice the witnesses over the weekend.
Okay, thank you. Anything further?
No.
All right. The evidence has two purposes. If all it was being done or being used for would be to rebut Dr. Lee, then obviously until Dr. Lee testified, it wouldn't be relevant. But in this case, it has the secondary purpose. It shows that certainly the possibility of evidence being removed, which besides impeaching Dr. Lee, it goes to show that the people have been prevented from putting on certain evidence and evaluating certain evidence that may be highly relevant, and the jury has a right to determine that in seeing the case that's being presented to them by the prosecution. So it has independent relevance, and therefore it doesn't have to wait till rebuttal.
Does that, just to articulate the position of the ruling of the court, for example, Mr. Diamond is one of these witnesses, and because I didn't hear him say anything in this.
Well, if you look at, I assume, it's people's choice to call Mr. Diamond, that although his testimony differs from the others, I suppose they can argue that he's just wrong as to the person he saw it with, and that in essence they're talking about the same event. I don't know.
Your Honor, I can clarify that.
All right.
I talked with Mr. Rosen about this. At this point, we don't believe that we're going to be calling Mr. Diamond. We do believe that we will be calling the rest of the witnesses that we've noted. I'm happy to reveal those to the court also, but we sent Mr. Rosen an email over the weekend on that. There's a number of other witnesses that are included, but at this point, I don't think we'll be calling Mr. Diamond.
Okay.
There's one other matter.
Yes.
I felt
there's always one other matter in this one.
Privileged nature of some comments and discussions Mr. Shapiro had with Mr. Dixon and Mr. Foreman.
I understand. Did people have a chance to reply to that yet?
Well, I read it. I'm happy to discuss it here. I don't see that these were privileged at all. There was no discussion at the time about any privileged material. In fact, a conversation was said to me and to Kevin McCormick at the time. I just can't imagine how these are privileged.
Well,
Mr. Bruno?
First of all, they're going to resolve the case, and I'm sorry. First of all, according to Mr. Shapiro, these conversations were an effort to resolve the case. They certainly fit within a broader penumbra of what might be considered negotiations. Negotiations are forbidden except for impeachment and limited purposes. Mr. Dixon may have a different interpretation, but Mr. Shapiro said, they were talking about the case according to the information from Mr. Shapiro. Mr. Shapiro was saying this case is not prosecutable, you have these weaknesses, you made these mistakes, the investigation was inadequate, don't file it, you can't win it. To me, that's a negotiating type of statement. Mr. Shapiro says his intent in making those statements were to try to settle the case. In that regard, by preventing the case from being filed or dissuading the prosecution from filing the case in the first place. That certainly sounds like a type of negotiation statement to me. And that was what Mr. Shapiro's intent was, according to his lawyer, as she related to me. So I think that I don't think we can categorically say that because the case wasn't filed, it's not a negotiation, or because the prosecution didn't consider it to be forensic in nature, although so I don't know what else it would have been. I think that there has to be some sort of determination on that.
May I respond?
And just, if I can, while I got the floor. The court had, in the earlier ruling concerning Ms. Kaplan, Mr. White, and those folks, indicated that this evidence would in no way be held against Mr. Spector. I think that at some point prior to this evidence being offered, this keeps growing, the scope and purpose of the evidence, it seems to us, but in any event, some admonition to the jury as to the purpose of this evidence and the use of this evidence and its inapplicability to Mr. Spector's having anything to do with it needs to be formed, because I think that this is highly prejudicial evidence beyond the speculative nature of it and beyond the uncertainty of it. I mean, that uncertain evidence comes in, that's not the problem, but it does lead to speculation, and it could lead to speculation that is specifically unwarranted against Mr. Spector. So I think we need to think about something along those lines.
They're two separate issues there. One, you're arguing about bringing in the conversation. I assume you're talking about the declaration filed by Mr. Shapiro during this conversation that you guys missed something.
I filed, it's quadruple hearsay at this point. I filed a declaration informing the court of what Ms. Levine told me what Mr. Spector said. What Mr. Shapiro said, and why he said it, just to get the data before the court. The people basically have said the same thing, that they have proffered a portion of that conversation. Mr. Shapiro said you missed something, and our team found it. Without any statement as to what it was or how it was relevant or anything about that.
It's starting to annoy me.
Ms. Levine tells me that
It's been annoying me for a minute.
position is that was part of a negotiation or an effort to resolve the case. That's that part. My letter comments had to do with Mr. Plord's motion.
Okay. Mr. Dixon?
Well, Mr. Bruno kind of just made my point. The declarations by, not only me, but Kevin McCormick as to Robert Shapiro's statements don't on their face have anything to do with settlement. In fact, my recollection is, and I could be wrong, but the case had already been filed and Mr. Shapiro had come to the office to pick up some discovery when he made this statement. In the statement, you got, and the exact statement's in the declarations, but basically the Sheriff's Department, or you forgot something that we picked up at the crime scene, has nothing to do with negotiations at all. And I just don't think that it's privileged under that discussion at all. And secondly, we are, with respect to the second issue, we are not in any way asking that the Dr. Henry Lee issue, the Stan White issue, be viewed by the jury as consciousness of guilt by the defendant. Not at all. Well, in fact, in the motion that in the jury instruction, proposed jury instruction that we filed, we made that very clear.
Do you have anything else to offer on the question of whether this is part of a negotiation discussion? Because it doesn't appear to be.
Well, the problem is that Ms. Levine wouldn't discuss
back in here, Bo Peep. Winding down this morning.
Well, I consider
always miss
myself
you.
to be a privilege holder.
Absolutely.
Apparently they didn't. So I think that, I can try to get them to say more, but I think we need to devote a few minutes to either have Mr. Shapiro generally state what the basis of his position that it was privilege because negotiation, or have Ms. Levine tell us that, because I put in what she told me.
Well, first of all, I don't know that her statement, and this is obviously no disrespect to Ms. Levine, isn't the person to do it. It seems to me, if you're asking me to make a determination as to whether any statement that was made would have been privileged, it's going to be the people that were there that are going to talk about it. It's not going to be the attorney for one of them. So if you want to call Mr. Shapiro as a witness,
great morning here at Murder Church per the usual.
Mr. McCormick or Mr. Dixon can testify as the case may be, and the court will hear all the evidence and make a determination whether it appears to be privileged. Right now, I don't believe so from what you told me, but I'm not going to preclude you. That is a separate matter from whether the jury should be admonished. And Mr. Dixon, it doesn't make any difference really what the people are using it for. There's a danger there that the jury might think that. I think it would be appropriate to have an admonition when that evidence comes in.
And if I could just clarify, it'll be Mr. McCormick who will be the witness.
Fine.
Just one matter, Your Honor, procedurally, since we're asserting privilege that is within the general again, penumbra of the attorney-client privilege. That's what 1153 of the Evidence Code and 1192.4. I believe that once we assert it, they have the people have the burden of proof to establish by a preponderance that the communications were not privileged. So I don't think.
Well, first of all, a declaration has to be subject to cross-examination, and other than that, you don't have any evidence. I mean, you have this all of a sudden the statement through Mr. Shapiro's attorney that, oh, by the way, when I made the statement or whatever statement was made, because later apparently he retracts it.
Okay, I agree with that point. I think that if Mr. Shapiro is called, then as a voir dire question, first question is, did you consider this matter to be privileged? If he says yes, then I think that the people have the burden of establishing that it was not privileged.
I think after the question, assuming that the question is asked, did you consider it privilege, and the answer is yes, the next question is why. I don't think that automatically shifts. There has to be more than a bald assertion. There has to be some basis for it.
No pun, I assume, on the nature of the assertion.
Are you casting follicle jokes my way, Mr. Deuce? There's no peril there. You don't have to worry.
Gift out 5 memberships.
Your time will come sooner or later.
But we're just trying to alert the court.
Well, we can have.
Forgot I still had
hearing.
some of those
The
this
bottom line
month.
is if
It's almost
people
end of the
are gonna
month.
Call Mr. Shapiro or Mr. McCormick, but then be prepared to have your witnesses present.
Well, Mr. Shapiro is the witness, so
Okay.
we're calling, he'll be here.
Okay.
Mr. McCormick's on the witness list also.
Okay. Let's see. And the other one is you filed your trial brief, which you've already discussed. You filed the rebuttal. And what about the compliance, the discovery compliance?
Yeah, it's been represented to me that Dr. Pena has no more notes or whatever associated with anything he reviewed recently. We were notified by email, I want to say Thursday or Friday, I'm not sure which, but that he had this new opinion. It was just an email that said that the bruising on the left side of the tongue was consistent with trauma. Other than that, we asked for any notes associated with any new stuff that he did or tissues that he reviewed, and it's been represented to us that he has none. So once they represented that to us, there's really no discovery issue unless that turns out not to be correct. In particular, there were a number of notes in Dr. Pena's file where he said he wanted to get data on suicide wounds and things like that, but he apparently never got the data. So that's one thing that we're going to get into. And then he was given all these materials from the district attorney's office, hundreds and hundreds of pages. And
that'd be crazy.
The letter went to him and Dr. Lockschnapp.
I hope so.
And he asked for the notes
I'm unsure.
associated with his review of that data and the fact that it was in the file, but apparently it never got to the file for some reason. In other words, he was told us he never reviewed any of that. So given that, there's no discovery, assuming that's correct.
Okay.
I have to assume that's correct. That's what Dr. Pena has indicated to us.
All right. Thank you.
May I bring up one last?
Yes.
Your Honor, since it looks like we're going to have a hearing involving Mr. Shapiro. I don't know if there were any notes taken any of the parties present.
Hey,
Mr.
Kelly,
McCormick,
thank you so much.
Mr. Dixon,
Have a great day.
to the statements. If
We're getting ready to wander down. I'm going to shout out these folks that are now members. We're going to wander down. It's been a great morning.
If there are notes, I think that at a minimum they ought to be presented to the court to determine if they have any relevance to the content of the meeting.
I don't believe there are any notes. The declarations were prepared soon thereafter.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right.
All right. We're going to continue with Dr. Pena. Another hour starting off part 5 Tuesday 8 p.m. Eastern time on the next Murder Church episode. Yeah, gifted out. I forgot that I still had some of these lurking for the month of July. Akasha, Mustang Driver, Susie Q, Don Burke, KRM 944.
Hey, motherfucker.
Get in this bitch.
Welcome to the party, pal. Hanging, banging.
Not messing around. Everybody hanging out. Holy shit. Thank you so much this morning. It's been an incredible morning. We're about halfway through a new will. We'll keep working on that Tuesday night. Everybody have a great rest of the day. Have a great start to Monday. We'll get there. And we'll see you Tuesday night again, everybody. And yeah, Crime Spot's hanging out in the chat. Thank you so much. She's got an awesome channel as well. Always covering true crime. And yeah, thank you for hanging out this morning. Everybody fucking rules. You're incredible. The Buzz Nation is growing by the day, by the hour. And I'm going to check out this weird egg coffee and give that the old check ski. But yeah, everybody, thank you all so much. Appreciate it, guys. Yeah, I'm going to try to get my eye better. Wait, wrong one. Wait, wrong one. Yeah, I'm going to try to get my eye to be less fucking red. But I mean, if it's a busted blood vessel, like they said, that could take longer to heal. And I mean, it doesn't really bother me, so. All right. Later, guys. Love y'all. See you Tuesday.
This